Chapter 16. AJ hit the off button and looked at Jeff. "Looks like you're going to be a daddy a little sooner than you thought." Jeff's face was the color of paste when he looked at AJ. "Man, this is making those black diamonds look like the bunny slope." At least he wasn't passing out, AJ reasoned. "Tell me about it." He guided the car around 2 more turns, and then, just ahead, the boulders came into view. "Hang on, guys, we're almost there." Through the next 2 contractions, Eve worked to get things set up as the doctor had instructed. The last of the fresh towels from the other bathroom were stacked at the end of the bed. Pillows from every available source were on the floor waiting for Eve to get to the point that doable meets its time. Finally, she knew she could wait for them no longer. The gasp from the head of the bed jerked Eve's attention to it because this was no scream, but far more urgent. "Eve?" Lisa's astounded voice said as she clawed backward. "I think this is it." "Okay," Eve said, without so much as a moment of decision. "We're going to have to scoot you down to the end." Carefully, she worked Lisa's frame to the end of the bed even as she put the pillows behind her for support. At the end of the bed, she set first one foot, then the other on the 2 chairs she had swiped from the dining room. Her foot crunched over the shower curtain that was now lying on the floor beneath the end of the bed. "Do you know how to do this?" Lisa asked. "I was hoping you did," Eve said, with the slightest hint of a laugh under the statement. "Reminds me next time to keep AJ here with me. Maybe he would at least know what to do," Lisa said, obviously trying not to focus on the impending occasion. Eve couldn't have agreed more. "Okay," she said as she grabbed another towel and took up position at the end of the bed. "The doctor said on the next contraction, you take a deep breath, hold it, and push for 10 seconds. Then you rest. If the baby's head gets here, then you're going to have to pant instead of pushing." Concerned compliance crossed through Lisa's tired eyes. Some part of Eve wished there wasn't quite so much trust in those eyes, because if this ended badly, she knew who she would blame forever. "Don't think about that," she coached herself. "You can do this. You have to." A gasp, and Eve's inward coaching turned outward. "Here we go. Deep breath. Hold it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Had she been watching this on video, Eve was quite sure she would have passed out. However, there weren't enough brain signals left to shut her system down. 10. "Okay, stop." Head and shoulders, Lisa collapsed into the pillows. "I think skiing would have been more fun." "You think?" Eve asked as she pulled a fresh towel up from the stack on the floor. "Ready to try again?" "If I said no, would it make any difference?" Eve laughed without making much of a sound. "I doubt it." "Then I guess I'm ready." When the next contraction hit, they fell in line like a well-timed marching band, Eve coaching and Lisa pushing. "I see the head," Eve said as her breath stopped. "Pant, pant." Just as that contraction subsided, Eve heard the noise by the front door. However, she stayed with her job until in unison the 3 men burst through the door. Without any real discussion, they each took their place around the bed. "Lisa, baby, I'm so sorry," Jeff said, racing to take Lisa's hand and wrap her overwhelmed body as best he could in his arms. "I'm so glad you're here," Lisa said. Genuine tears traced down her cheek as she reached a hand up to clasp his. AJ helped Eve up from the floor, even as she gave the update to the doctor, who took her position. "I just saw the head," Eve said. "I've got towels and water." The doctor surveyed the situation and nodded to her. "I may have to sign you up for my nursing staff." A smile started on Eve's face just as the next contraction hit. Instantly, she and AJ sprang into action to assist the doctor. AJ grabbed the doctor's bag and started laying out the instruments that they would need. Eve stood, ready and willing to do whatever the doctor decided he needed her to do. 1, 2, 3. Eve started counting as though that was her assignment, the one thing she could still do after she had done so much. "We've got a crown," the doctor said excitedly. When Eve got to 10, Lisa relaxed, gulping in air as her shoulders went limp. "Eve," the doctor said, and she snapped to attention. "I want you and Jeff to hold Lisa up on this one. Make a back for her to lean on." Instantly, Eve stepped past AJ, whose countenance was pure concentration. She sat down on the bed as Jeff pulled Lisa up off the pillow. He sat behind her so that her shoulders rested on his, and Eve's place evaporated. Quickly, she grabbed Lisa's hand, and her excitement burst through her. "Hey, I saw the head. It's like right there." As she looked at her friend, it occurred to her that the one person who should be happiest at the moment was the one that was too exhausted to feel anything. Gently, Eve patted the hand she held. "You're about to be a mommy." Weakly, Lisa smiled at her as a contraction wrenched through her body. "Deep breath," Eve coached. "Push. 1, 2, 3. She was simultaneously watching Lisa and the doctor. "Don't stop," the doctor called as he worked with the baby. "Here's the head. Great, great. The head's out. Okay, Lisa, relax for a minute. You're doing so good." "Black hair," Eve told her, and Lisa's eyes went liquid. A moment, and then the doctor exhaled. "Here we go again. This is it." In the briefest span of time she had ever experienced, Eve's gaze caught AJ's, and he smiled at her in awe and excitement. Then their attention snapped back to the experience happening around them. 7, 8, 9, Eve counted as overwhelming wonderment gripped her. "It's here," the doctor said as his hands worked quickly. "And we have a baby boy." At that moment, a loud wail emanated from the tiny form in the doctor's hands. "And he has a good set of lungs, too." Relief flooded over Lisa, who collapsed into Jeff. Quickly, the doctor set about his work on the new life that had made such a grand entrance. "A boy," Jeff gasped as he hugged Lisa to him. "Oh, man, it's a boy." His face buckled into relief and joy. "We have a boy." The pent-up fear and determination spilled over Eve's lashes as relief flooded through her system. "You did it, Lise. You did it, girl." She squeezed the hand that was still in her own, and then looked over at the little bundle that the doctor laid into the clean towels AJ was holding. Carefully, AJ cleaned the child, and then he stopped and gazed down in complete wonder. "Oh, he's beautiful, Lise." AJ stepped over to the side of the bed with the baby cradled perfectly in his hands. As he passed the baby to Lisa, Eve got her first glimpse. Lots and lots of jet black hair. Once the transfer was made, AJ's hand found Eve's shoulder as the four of them gazed at the form that whimpered in Lisa's arms and then let out a loud cry. "Oh," Lisa said, resting into Jeff, who was smiling so big he looked like he might in fact burst. As Eve watched her friend, the tears slid into Lisa's eyes as she looked at the little creation in her arms. Gently, Lisa stroked the baby's cheek with the edge of her finger. "Hi, little one. How are you?" The baby let out another cry, and the four of them laughed. "He's so incredible," Jeff said, mesmerized by the sight. He pulled Lisa's head back into him and kissed the top of her hair. "Oh, man." His gaze went back to the tiny infant. Then he glanced up at AJ and seemed to remember the others in the room. The fringes of his lashes were laced with the emotion pouring from his heart. "Thanks, AJ, man." He reached over to shake AJ's hand. AJ shook Jeff's hand even as he said, "Hey, Eve's the one you should be thanking. All I did was drive." Gently, he laid his hands on her shoulders, and that simple gesture felt incredible. When Jeff looked at Eve, thanks was all but unnecessary. She reached over and put her hand on his forearm. "You've got one brave lady here," Eve said, as her hand slid from Jeff's arm to Lisa's. She did all the real work. However, Lisa was in a world unto herself as she gently stroked the tiny cheek. "Isn't he amazing?" Lisa asked in complete awe. "I have a baby. Oh my gosh." Emotion, relief, and overwhelming concern for her new role slid through her voice. She looked at Eve as if she couldn't quite figure out where she was. "I'm a mom." Then the tears took over. "And a beautiful one at that," Eve said as she leaned over and put her arms around Lisa. Head to head, they looked at the tiny figure whose eyes were blinking open. "Oh, man, we did it. I can't believe we did it." When the initial excitement waned and fatigue once again took over Lisa's features, AJ stepped away from the bed and set about cleaning the room. Luckily, Eve had done a good job of getting ready. He took the chairs back into the dining room and came back as the doctor took the baby to do a more thorough examination. Working quickly, AJ removed the shower curtain from the floor and stacked it with the 2 pans of water next to the bed. Room in that bathroom was at a premium, so he took the items to the other. He had just emptied the first pan into the tub when he felt Eve's presence behind him. He glanced over his shoulder, and his gaze caught hold of her standing in the doorway, hands in pockets, watching him. "Can I help?" "You sure?" She shrugged. "I made it through the delivery. Maybe I won't pass out now." "We need to get the sheets on the bed changed," he said, not letting his overwhelming desire to grab hold of her take him over. "Okay, I'll get that done." And she was gone. AJ couldn't quite find his breath back. He had thought she was the most incredible person he'd met long before now, but the second he had been given the chance to see her stand face to face with fear and pounded into submission, whatever denials about his feelings that he'd managed to muster to that point had disintegrated. She was strength personified, compassion, understanding, and beauty, all rolled into one. His heart turned over every time he thought about her voice on the phone, scared out of her mind and totally unsure of her own ability to handle the crisis. He laughed softly at the thought as he ran the water over the shower curtain. One thing was for sure. After today, if there was a crisis in his life, he wanted Eve right there beside him. "You want me to wash these?" she asked from behind him, and he jumped at the sound of her voice. "Yeah, we need to." She turned to leave. "And the towels, too," he called. Her form reappeared in the doorway. "I thought I told you I don't do blood." "Yeah, seems like I remember that part," he said with a laugh, and once again she was gone. Love, there was simply no other word for it, swept over him, and all other thoughts vanished. Somehow, he had to find a way to tell her, because sooner or later his body was going to get away from his mind, and at that point, there was no telling where this would go. Dr. Brealey had taken his instruments to the other bathroom, and Eve was busy wiping the master bath floor when AJ returned. She heard him in the bedroom, although he didn't know she was there. "Hey, Mom and Dad," he said, knocking softly, and Eve's heart jumped into her throat at the gentle sound of his voice. "How's the newest member of the family?" "Great, thanks to someone," Lisa said softly. She didn't have to see his eyes. Eve knew how serene they would look by heart. "Thanks for keeping Dad here in one piece," Lisa said as she reached up to put a hand on Jeff, who sat beside her on the bed. "Oh, so you didn't tell her about the black diamonds, then?" AJ asked with a laugh. "Shh," Jeff said instantly. "That was supposed to be a secret." "Some secret," Lisa said, and Eve heard the fatigue in her friend's voice. "If you wanted that one to fly, you should have taken Eve. Isn't that right, Eve?" Her heart snagged as she stood and stepped over to the door. "I certainly would have been safer." When Eve's gaze caught on AJ's smile, her heart did a somersault right through her chest. She pushed the hair up out of her face as she ducked back into the bathroom and threw the rag in the sink. Without question, she knew they could see straight through her when she looked at AJ, so she quickly decided it was best not to so much as glance in his direction when she walked back into the room. However, with his light gray sweater and happiness beaming from that sweet face, that wasn't exactly easy. "So," she said, focusing on the little family of 3 rather than on the figure standing on the other side of the bed. "What's this little miracle's name, anyway?" "Alexander Jeffrey," Lisa said lovingly. "Alexander," Eve repeated as she smiled and brushed a gentle hand over the baby's head. "That was Dustin's middle name." Lisa smiled at her. "It was my grandfather's, too." It's a beautiful name, Eve said as tears came to her eyes. Just like he is. Yeah, and I wonder where you got the Jeffrey part, AJ said teasingly. Must be the milkman's name or something. Hey, you better watch it over there. Jeff pointed a warning finger at AJ, but he laughed long before the statement had a chance to sound serious. Alexander Jeffrey, Eve said softly as she gazed at the tiny, scrunched-up face. Then the name jumped through her. AJ. What? He asked. No, she said, laughing. That's his initials, AJ. Oh, no, Jeff said in mock distress. He looked down at Lisa. Is it too late to change our minds? She didn't bother to even respond to the comment. Instead, she looked down at the little face and smiled. You hear that, Alex? You're named after 4 heroes. Undiluted joy slipped over AJ's features even as Eve tried not to watch him. Slowly, he shook his head as he took in the scene. After a moment, noise at the door brought the 4 gazes to it. I think we should let the new mama have some rest, Dr. Brealey said, clearly not wanting to break up the party. Yeah, AJ said softly. I think things are clean enough. We can do the rest later. Eve and AJ started for the door. Is it okay if I stay? Jeff asked, sounding unsure. Dr. Brealey smiled. They're all yours. They walked out into the living room, and AJ shut the door quietly behind them. Midway across the dining room, the doctor turned to him. Thanks so much, Doc, AJ said, suddenly feeling far older than he ever had before. We were lucky to have you. I think they are lucky to have such good friends as you two, Dr. Brealey said. AJ glanced at his watch. You want me to take you back down? Actually, the doctor said with a glance out the window that was now cloaked in falling darkness. I thought maybe I'd stay up here tonight, and tomorrow we could transport the 2 of them back down to the hospital. I'd really like the pediatrician to check the baby out. Okay, AJ said, working through that plan. You can have my room. I can take the couch. He could have my room, Eve said, stepping forward from where she was leaning on the back of the couch. Oh no, I'm not going to make a lady sleep on the couch, Dr. Brealey said. Even my dear wife, Charlotta, God rest her soul, sent me to the couch when someone was banished there. No, I couldn't take your room. It's settled then, AJ said. You know, we really probably need to think about something for supper, Eve said, sighing slowly. It's not hospital food, AJ said to Dr. Brealey, but she's not too bad of a cook. Eve shot him an I can't believe you just said that look. Well, if she cooks like she nurses, we're in good shape, Dr. Brealey said. Why don't you go get settled? Eve asked. I'll get something started. AJ waited for Dr. Brealey to turn back for the other bedrooms, and when Eve turned for the kitchen and brushed close to him, his sanity went with her. Scratching his head to beat the desire back down, he turned and followed them. Adrenaline. It was the only logical explanation of how Eve was still awake as she and the 3 men spent the meal getting to know one another. Dr. Brealey found AJ's stories of the big city trauma scene fascinating, and although a few of them threatened to make her sick, she too was enthralled. It wasn't the stories themselves, but how calmly he seemed to handle them, and how no matter how horrible they were, he seemed to have a way of thinking through a situation so the best thing could be done. From the little girl stuck in the drain pipe to the day that he and Jeff had met on a windy bridge, trying to pull a life back over the side, the stories solidified what she was beginning to see so clearly. There was far more to this soft-spoken, gentle soul than she had ever given him credit for. Well, it sounds like Houston's mighty lucky to have the 2 of you in its service, Dr. Brealey said with a note of approval in his voice. Machos a dime a dozen these days, but real courage is getting harder and harder to come by all the time. AJ shrugged as his gaze focused on his glass. I guess you do what you have to do. Yes, you do, Dr. Brealey said. Eve's gaze went to the downcast, thought-filled eyes she knew by heart. The heroism he exhibited wasn't about showing off to the world. It was based in a genuine desire to do whatever he could to help. right or wrong. Whether it turned out well or not, he was going to be right in there helping, doing whatever he could to make a difference. She had thought him so young, and yet it had nothing to do with being young. He had seen the horrors of the world, and he chose to live despite them. It was a standard she wished she had the courage to reach for. A moment of silence wrapped around the room, and then Jeff pushed back from the table. "I guess I'd better go check on them again. Make sure they haven't escaped or something." Instantly, Eve snapped back to reality as she, too, stood and grabbed for dishes. "Yeah, I'd better get this cleaned up." "Here," AJ said, stopping her hand with one touch as Jeff left. "I'll get these. You go relax." "I can get them," she said, not wanting him to think her weak. But his smile wafted through her tired soul. "I think you've done enough for today." "Oh, you think?" she asked as mischievousness slipped from his eyes to her heart. "Never argue with a man who's offering to do the dishes," Dr. Brealey said earnestly, and both gazes went to him. "That was the mantra my Charlotta lived by." "Well, Charlotta was a smart woman," AJ said, gazing right into Eve's eyes. Her spirit felt like it might float right off the earth as Eve released the dish in her hand to his care. "Well, I could use a shower." "There you go," Dr. Brealey said, standing. "Now, you go get comfortable. Us men can handle a few dishes." She stopped for one more moment as if to give them a chance to change their minds. "Go on," AJ said with a slight nod. "We'll still be here when you get back." "You promise?" she asked as fate turned a page right before her eyes. "You know it." When Eve came out of the bathroom, AJ took his turn. After a quick shower, he stood at the mirror. Without bothering too long with styling his hair, he ran some gel through it and called it good. He didn't even bother to grab a cap as he headed out to the living room. This wasn't about impressing her. It was simply about wanting to be with her every single moment that was available to him. However, when he stepped back out into the living room, only Dr. Brealey was there, sitting in the chair reading. "Shower's free," AJ said, not totally feeling in the same league with a good doctor. "Ah, okay," Dr. Brealey said, looking up at him. Then he returned to his reading. "Snow stopped. It's a nice night out." "Oh, really?" The old man's face lit with a soft smile. "I think you should go see for yourself." With a question, AJ looked over to the sliding door. He stepped over to it and pulled the curtain back. There on the porch, white sweater draped gracefully over a set of black jeans, stood the best dream he'd ever had. Slowly, quietly, he slid the door to the side, stepped out, and pulled the curtain and the door closed behind him. She was leaning on the railing with her elbows, gazing down past the pine trees into the hollow beyond. Peacefulness slipped into his spirit as he stepped to her side and laid his own elbows on the railing next to her. She never so much as glanced at him. "Dustin would have liked it here," she said, as if drifting on a dream. AJ's gaze floated over her, face, hair, gorgeous eyes. "You did good today." He always said you couldn't judge somebody by what they say, but when they show you who they are, you should believe them. Her head dropped on the memory, and then, just as AJ thought he was going to lose her to the memories forever, she turned and caught his heart in her gaze. "I couldn't have gotten through today without you." Her eyes brightened with tears, and he saw every emotion, from fear to pain to joy, slide through her eyes. Gently, he turned to her, and she slipped into his arms, gripping him as though she was grabbing onto a lifeline. "I was so scared. And then the pickup, and they wouldn't come and help us, and I didn't know what I was going to do." His arms tightened around her, fighting off the nightmares of the afternoon that seemed to be clinging to her spirit. "Lisa kept looking at me like I knew what I was doing, but I didn't," she continued through the tears. "I didn't have a clue, and I just knew I was going to mess something up or do something that was going to hurt her or the baby." With a sniff, Eve wiped the tears as she pulled back from him. "But the whole time, I just kept thinking about you, and about how you didn't even question that I could handle it." She looked at him, searching through the depths of his eyes for his soul. Every time it got really bad, I could just hear you in my head saying, "You can do this, Eve. You can do this." And somehow I did. The honesty pouring from her heart became too much to allow her to face him, and she turned and gazed far out into the darkness. For a moment, the only sound was the whisper of the wind in the trees amidst her sigh. When Dustin died, I didn't let anyone see the real me. I couldn't. They looked at me and they saw this rock. They thought I was handling everything so well. Somehow I knew I had to be strong, keep it together, so they wouldn't have to worry about me. What they didn't know was that I was really freaking out. There were days I couldn't even walk across the room without falling in the middle of the floor and laying there for hours. I couldn't go into our bedroom. I couldn't look at pictures. I couldn't even hear a siren without breaking down. I couldn't do anything. But the thing I really couldn't do was show that to anybody. I couldn't be who I really was with them. Her words faded out as he heard her soft breaths through the tears. Today, on the phone, with you, that's who I really was. I was scared and terrified and panicking. But you didn't think I was weak because of that. You made me believe I didn't have to not be weak to be strong. I could be scared out of my mind, but that was okay because I could be that and still do what needed to be done. Gently, he laid his hands on her shoulders, and after only a moment, she leaned back into him. His arms wrapped around her as they stared out into the night together. Her hair brushed across his cheek, causing emotions he'd never felt to surge to the surface. Just holding her this close made logic, reason, and reality slip away from him. You know, sometimes weakness isn't such a bad thing, he said softly. Sometimes it's in our weakest moment that we find out how strong we really are. She shook her head. I don't know how you do that every day. Going out there into situations you have no control over every day. It's like putting who you are in the middle of the highway, knowing you could get run over whether you make a wrong move or not. It happens. His mind flashed back to the sound of sirens and screams in the deep middle of a Houston night, and he took in a shaky breath. Sometimes you do get run over. But how do you do that? How do you get yourself to stand out there the next time? That was a question he had been asking ever since he had found out the fireman he had treated that night hadn't made it. Well, first you have to have a lot of faith. You have to believe that you did your best. And then sometimes it helps to have a really short memory. She shook her head incredulously. You laugh, she said, tilting again on the fear. But I just keep thinking if something would have happened today, I would never have forgiven myself. All laughter evaporated from his soul as his head fell. The air suddenly felt like a serrated edge to his burning lungs. I didn't say it was easy. A deep need to understand was lodged in her eyes when she turned to him, and her gaze burrowed into his. Were you scared today? Had he wanted to hide, there was no place to go, and the question hit him so fast that honesty was the only option. Like an avalanche that starts with one rock, but picks up frightening speed in mere seconds, the emotions he'd been holding down ever since the first time they didn't answer the phone cascaded over him. Terrified. His eyes fell closed as the stinging pain of helplessness flashed through him. I just kept thinking I should have known. I should have made it a point to call on every run. I could have driven faster, gotten up here sooner. I wanted to help Lisa. I wanted you not to sound so scared. I wanted to do something to help Jeff, because he looked like his world was crashing down around him, but there was nothing I could do to help any of you. A tear escaped from the edge of his eye and traced its way down his cheek like a single perfect raindrop. Then, like the brush of an angel's wing, She reached up and ran her thumb over it before tracing down his face to just past his lips. "So, white knights get scared too?" she asked softly, and when he opened his eyes, there was only a simple understanding in her eyes. "Yeah," he said, sniffing back the other tears. "They do." When her hand came to rest on his chest, the gap between his soul and hers disappeared, and as he gazed into her soft brown eyes, so did everything else. Softly, his hand slid up to the place where her sweater fell from her shoulder. At first, it did little more than brush the skin there, but in a rush, one touch was not enough. The palm of his hand slid under her hair and cupped around the slenderness of her neck. The trust in her eyes was the last thing he saw as his own fell closed. A brush, and only that, as the space between them evaporated in their need to be closer. Once, twice, his lips touched hers. Then need, want, and desire flashed through him in a blinding rush. He was no longer breathing, only living for his lips to be on hers. Deeper, he meshed his soul with hers, wanting only to go deeper still, until they were no longer two, but one and the same. Time and space skipped a beat as heart, body, and soul, he slipped through their bounds and flew with the angel in his arms. One hand slid down her back to the hollow at her waist as the other ran its way up and down the soft fabric covering her back, sensing the smooth silkiness of the skin beneath it. Ecstasy itself couldn't have felt as good. When his sanity corralled his body long enough to pull him back, he was still spinning on the passion flooding through him. In fact, he couldn't quite tell how his legs were still standing at this point. The last few moments in her arms made every death-defying stunt he'd ever pulled feel like sitting in a chair snoozing. Her gaze caught his, and he could see she was as blown away as he was. He tried to smile, but it didn't make it that far, as it vanished into the breathlessness clutching his body. Then, the smile fell into a well of confusion and concern as he searched her eyes, trying to surmise if he had just made a huge mistake. However, there was no indictment in her eyes, only unconditional trust. "You shouldn't do that to me," he finally said, pulling sanity back to him with a gulp of the chilled night air. "Me?" she asked in surprise. "What did I do?" His smile returned. "Standing out here, looking all warm and inviting. You really shouldn't do that." "Yeah, I noticed you didn't bring a coat." "With you around, who needs one?" She slipped into the shelter of his embrace again. "You know, they're going to try to take the credit for this." Softly, he laughed as the middle of his soul opened up to the unqualified way she seemed to be with him. The barriers had collapsed. Friends had given way to something he had only allowed himself to hope for in the middle of his deepest dreams. "I'd say it's an even trade." And the tightening of her arms around him only solidified that belief. Chapter 17. They had managed to get Daddy Jeff, Mommy Lisa, and Baby Alex bundled up and into the car, which was no small feat considering Daddy was behaving like he'd lost his mind, Mommy was still in a lot of pain, and Baby Alex chose every other semi-sane moment to make sure no one had forgotten he was around. "We'll take Dr. Breeley and follow you," AJ said, wondering at the sanity of letting Jeff drive. Jeff, AJ was learning, was not always the take-charge-I-can-do-anything firefighter he had met that first day on the bridge. That day, he had thought Jeff had a handle on everything. Today, however, he was quickly learning how wrong that impression was. "You're coming right now, though, right?" Jeff asked. AJ glanced over the top of the car as he watched Eve help Dr. Breeley into the pickup that AJ had spent most of the morning digging out of the snow. He smiled at the sight of her. "Yeah, right now." "I'd really rather have the shoulder strap," Dr. Breeley said when Eve stopped to wait for him to scoot over. "Oh," she said, taken aback. "Okay." She slammed the passenger door and went around the pickup just as AJ stepped over from the car. Her heart smiled for her. "Looks like you get to sit by me." Mischievousness flashed through his eyes. That could be dangerous. She arched her eyebrows at him. "Tell me about it." Then, with a jump, she vaulted into the pickup and settled in the middle of the seat. When he crawled in after her, Eve's senses went on all points alert. The feel of his lips on hers still reverberated through parts of her that she had thought had long since ceased to exist. Standing on that porch, his arms wrapped around her, she could have stayed there forever. Unfortunately, life, it seemed, had other plans. "You know, they're going to need a car seat," Dr. Brealey said, as if he was talking to himself when the little convoy had crossed onto the highway. Instantly, Eve pushed the hair out of her eyes and looked at him. He shrugged. "I'm assuming they're going back to Houston at some point." Eve looked over at AJ, whose countenance fell in concern. "They don't have any of their baby supplies either," Eve said. "Let's get them to the hospital in one piece, and then we'll worry about shopping," AJ said, and Eve smiled at him as she rammed her shoulder into his. "Just what you wanted to do today, huh?" He smiled at her as one of his hands dropped from the steering wheel onto hers, sending pulses of heat up her arm. "Sounds like fun to me." "Do you know anything about car seats?" Eve asked as she rounded the metal racks of the Taos Walmart that was stacked with them. "Probably not as much as you do," AJ said, following her with a cart that already had several items for Lisa in it. "Oh boy, that's not what I wanted to hear." Eve finally stopped when she reached the place she had started at. She set her hands on her hips and surveyed the choices. Newborn, so these sitting-up things are out. "Yeah, his head would look like them dumb dogs in the backs of people's cars," AJ said, bobbing his head back and forth. "I'm sure Alex would be thrilled. He's not even a day old and already you're making fun of him." AJ shrugged. "Hey, he's part of the family. It comes with the territory." "What's the difference between these two?" Eve asked, indicating two carriers on the top rack as she examined them. "Looks like about $40. "Yeah, but what makes one $40 better? Or do they just think some dumb sucker like you might not look and pay the $40 extra without realizing it?" That was harsh. AJ laid his hand on his heart even as he examined the two carriers. "Oh, this one has that turned handle thing. The other one doesn't." I wonder how much difference that would make." He stepped back. "I wouldn't have a clue." She stood for a moment, deciding, and then reached for the more expensive one. Carefully, she set it in the cart, but it didn't really fit. "It's for Alex. He's worth $40 extra." "Now what?" AJ asked, placing a hand over the box to steady it as he followed her out of that aisle. "Diapers and burp rags and pacifiers and clothes." "You know, there's only so much room in that pickup," he said, pushing and holding the unwieldy object simultaneously. "Yeah, right. You just don't want to shop." "I didn't say that." She turned into another aisle. "You didn't have to." When she stopped in front of the display of various baby paraphernalia, she surveyed it. "Just think of this as the ultimate black diamond of existence." He looked at her skeptically. "Uh-huh. I thought that was shoes." Despite the fact that she was sincerely searching for just the right items, Eve laughed. "No, that would be the bowls." "Oh," he said, stretching the syllable out past its length. "Besides, I can't wait to see what little booties they have for him." Gamely, AJ walked up beside her and examined the display. "So, what are we looking for anyway?" "Diapers," Eve said, finally finding the tiny stack of newborn diapers. She pulled one out and handed it to him. Then she calculated the time until they got back to Houston and pulled another one out. Better make it 2. Dutifully, he put the diapers under the car seat. "And we need socks." She reached out and grabbed a tiny blue pair. "Look how little these are. Aren't they precious?" He took them from her and held them up. How can anyone have feet this small? "And here's wipes and a bib. Oh, look at this bib. Mommy's little angel. Isn't that just precious?" "You're not getting any ideas, are you?" he asked with concern. In mock annoyance, she reached over and hit him with the bib. You really want to go through that again? Not any time soon, he said doubtfully. I didn't think so, she said, but barely got the words out before she was drawn over to the baby clothes. Oh, look at these. She pulled one out and held it up. Isn't this just the cutest thing you've ever seen? Second cutest, he said with a grin. Then his gaze snagged on the rack of tiny hats just above the clothes. Oh man, look at this little baseball cap. We've got to get this. Yeah, now who's got the fever? Now that you mention it, I am feeling kind of faint. AJ's step swayed to the side as he put his hand to his forehead. Oh, Eve, catch me. I'm delirious from shopping fever. You're delirious, all right, but I don't think it's shopping's fault, she said as she sidestepped his antics to get to the next rack. He stopped incredulously. You're not even going to catch me? She held up another little outfit. Shopping, AJ, she said as she balanced the words with her hands. Shopping, AJ. She shook her head. It's a tough choice. Before she could react, he reached over and grabbed her around the waist. I think you should pay for that comment. Hey, now, she said, dropping her face into seriousness. Remember the blue paint incident? He looked around. I don't see any paint. Oh, yeah? There's some right here. Her finger traced its way from his temple down his cheek. And right here. She reached across and traced down the other side. And here? He asked as he leaned toward her and found her lips with his. The fact that they were standing in the middle of the baby section of Walmart escaped from her consciousness. All she knew, all she wanted to know, was the feel of his lips on hers. When he broke the kiss, he gazed at her and then shook his head. I never knew shopping could be so much fun. You just weren't shopping with the right person until now. He exhaled. I think you're right. Knowing that she needed to put distance between her and the feelings he pulled up in her, she turned around and reached for another outfit. However, he never left as he wrapped his arms around her and rested his chin on her shoulder. She held a blue and white sleeper and a blue and gold sleeper up for his inspection. Which one? Doesn't matter, he said, and she felt him burrow into her hair to get to her neck. Hey! She hit the top of his head with the hanger. Pay attention. I'm trying. Believe me, I'm trying. She shook her head. I find that hard to believe. You think this is bad? Just wait till we get to the shoes, he said, and buried his face into her hair. She couldn't help but laugh out loud, and after a second he let her go as she went back over to the cart. Oh, you know what else we need? She asked. What's that? A shower curtain. For what? He asked, not entirely sure of where that idea was headed. To put in that other bathroom, Eve said as she pushed the cart backward out of the baby stuff. Why? She scrunched her nose at him. Because, ew. I washed it. And I'm sure you did a very good job, but I'm not leaving Ash with a shower curtain that's seen that much of life. She pushed the cart down the main thoroughfare and turned into the household goods aisle. He shrugged. Maybe we should get them new towels, too. The towels didn't exactly cover their eyes. You know what? That's a good idea. There were a couple that I really couldn't get the stains out of. No, I was kidding. That was a joke. Ha-ha. She held up 2 shower curtains. Which one? By the look in his eyes, it was clear he had no idea. That one. This one it is. She put his choice back on the shelf and the other one in the cart. Hey. Hey what? She asked with a shrug. Women's intuition. Whatever the man says, do the opposite. Now, you know, I didn't hear you saying that yesterday. She smiled at him. Yeah, well, yesterday you knew what you were talking about. Today, you're on my turf. Oh, I see how you are. Besides, Eve said playfully, there was a rip in that one I could see from the back. Incredulously, he shook his head. You are something else. You know that? And just what that something else is, we haven't quite figured out yet, she said, running a hand over various towels on the display. Finally, she made her choice. All done? He asked, when she didn't immediately take off for another section of the store after placing the towels in the cart. "Yeah, I guess so," she said, scrawling down her mental list. As they backed out of that aisle, Eve saw him pick up his shower curtain choice and turn it over. With a smile, he shook his head and put it back as he caught up to where she was. "I told you." His hand found the small of her back, and he leaned in close to her. "Next time, I'll listen." When she looked at him, teasing and unfettered happiness met in her chest. Smart man. "And these 2 little sleepers," Eve said, pulling them out of the sack for Lisa and Jeff's inspection. "We couldn't decide, so we got both of them." She laid them to the side as her hand reached down into the bag for the final item, and she smiled. "And this was not my idea." Slowly, she pulled out the little hat, and Lisa melted with one look. "Oh, a little baseball cap. It's so cute." Lisa took it and set it on Alex's head. No, that's not quite right," AJ said with a soft laugh. "Here, let me fix it." He reached over and turned the cap around on the tiny little sleeping head. "Perfect." "Oh no," Jeff said, smacking himself on the head. "What have we done?" But Lisa looked at AJ with no joke in her eyes. "It's perfect. Thanks." "You're welcome," he said, barely getting the words out. Eve's gaze traced over him, and vulnerable joy was all that was written on his face. Quietly, she stepped over to his side and wrapped her arm around his back. "If you need anything else, we now know where Walmart is." A question ran between Lisa and Jeff for a moment, and then Jeff spoke up. "It's going to be at least Wednesday before we get out of here, and then we're going to have to drive back. You guys really don't have to stay." "But, oh," Eve said, having not realized they wouldn't all be going back together. Yeah, I guess you're right." She looked at AJ with the unspoken questions. "I'm on shift Wednesday morning," he said. "I'd love to stay, but I probably should be getting back." "Well, since it's like short notice and everything, if you need to use our tickets to make up the difference," Jeff said. AJ held up a hand. "No, hey, that's cool." "No, we insist," Jeff said seriously. "We won't be able to use them for a while anyway. They might as well be put to good use." "Okay," AJ finally said, accepting for both of them. "Thanks." "No," Jeff said as he reached out for AJ's hand. "Thank you." The brilliant stars shone above them as Eve and AJ sat out in the hollow on the felled tree they had ventured down to upon their return to the cabin. "You know," Eve said, leaning back into his arms as he leaned on the upright roots, "I always wondered why people seemed so different after they had a baby." AJ's arms moved slightly around her, but he said nothing. "I mean, I had friends who were like go out every weekend and party all night, and then they'd get married and have a baby, and they were gone. I'm sure my friends thought that about me with Dustin, but we still did stuff, you know? Go out, have fun." She ran her fingers over the small rope of her belt. "But when that baby comes, it's like everything else just doesn't matter anymore." For a moment, AJ just breathed. "Why didn't you and Dustin ever have kids?" "I'm sure we would have eventually, but he was getting his career started, and I was getting mine started, and the baby thing just got put on the back burner." "Do you wish now?" "Sometimes," she said with a small smile. "I've thought about it, but me with a baby? Now there's a scary thought." "I don't know." AJ pushed her far enough away from his shoulders so he could look down at her. "I think you'd make a great mom." Rather than protest, she watched her hand slip down that rope. "I hope so." He leaned into her so that his lips were right on her ear. "I know so." She turned to look at him, and never would she have doubted that he would tell her anything other than the truth. "How did I get so lucky to find you?" "I didn't think you were looking." "I didn't either." Any doubt left in the scattered recesses of her mind drifted away the moment she released herself into the power of his arms. She was sitting there, barely balanced on the scratchy trunk of a tree, and yet she knew in his arms she would never fall. He would never let her. The feel of his lips on hers melted through her so that she wondered how she could ever have seen him as anything other than the man he was. Strong, capable, solid. Her dreams were no match for the reality that was AJ Knight. He wasn't Dustin's replacement. He wasn't Dustin. He was AJ, and that was all she ever wanted him to be. When his lips left hers, he gazed into her eyes. Her body couldn't have moved if it had wanted to, which it didn't. "I don't ever want to leave," she whispered, and his soft smile slipped through her. "So you're ready to try those black diamonds, huh?" One hand ran its way down the angles of his face. "I think I'm on one right now." Gently, he bent toward her. "First, you jump off the top." He kissed her forehead. "Then you slide down that first incline." His lips slipped over her temple. "Then that heart-stopping moment when you think there's no way you can hold on to control." In a breath, his lips were on hers, and there was no doubt anywhere in her what that moment felt like. A moment, and then another, and then he pulled back to look at her. "Tell me this isn't a dream." "If it is," she said softly, "I never want to wake up." He pulled her up into a hug so tight that her breath, had it been in her control, had nowhere to go. "Man, I wish this was a movie," he finally said when all the oxygen in her system was gone. "Why?" she asked, catching her breath when he released her. "Because, do you know how easy it would be to take you up there and finish this scene?" "Finish this?" She choked on the question. Confusion dove through the happiness. "That's not what you want?" "Are you kidding? I want it more than anything, but I saw what throwing caution to the wind did to my mom, and I don't want that for myself, or for you." "Your mom and dad?" "They tried, I think, and maybe at first they really thought it could work. But I promised myself a long time ago that my life was going to be different, that I wasn't going to fall into the trap that they had, and that was easy. Until now." Eve finished for him as the compliment washed over her. "Yeah, until now." His gaze fell from her face. "You probably think that sounds really lame and childish." "No," she said sincerely. "I think you're smart enough to know where that line is for you. That's anything but childish." She wrapped an arm over his shoulder. "Besides, it's not like I'm complaining or anything." Soft uncertainty wafted through his eyes as that statement wound through him. "Are you sure?" "Yeah." Chapter 18. "Here, I've got it," AJ said, grabbing Eve's carry-on bag out of the overhead compartment. "It's heavy, be careful," Eve said as he pulled it out. The bag came out with a thud against his shoulder. "No kidding, what's in here anyway? Rocks?" Carefully, he readjusted the luggage in his arms as they started down the aisle to get out of the plane. "I can't tell you what's in there. If I did, you might know all of my secrets," she said as she purposely stopped walking one step so that his body would shadow hers a little closer. She couldn't explain it, but she really liked the safety of being so close to him. Mischievousness flashed through his eyes. "I don't already?" "Not by a long shot," she said with a smile. "Not by a long shot." Reluctantly, she turned and followed the other passengers out of the door and across the sky cab until once again they were standing in Houston, Texas. "It's good to be home." "You didn't like the mountains?" he asked, and she heard the hint of vulnerability under the teasing. "The mountains, the stars, the snow. When are we going back?" she asked as they started out of the gate. He looked up at a monitor. "First flight to New Mexico leaves in 2 hours. Her arm wound through his. Boy, Lisa and Jeff would be surprised. Not half as surprised as my boss would be tomorrow. "Ugh, work." She flipped her hair back so she could lay her head on his shoulder. "Maybe home isn't such a good thing after all." They stepped onto the escalator marked baggage claim. "So you think they'll make it back all right?" "I just hope Lisa's had some psychological training," AJ said. Jeff wasn't exactly calm and cool about the whole situation. "Oh, so you noticed that too?" Incredulously, AJ shook his head. "I always thought he was so together." "Jeff?" Eve asked incredulously. "Mister, I can't get 2 words out to save my life?" AJ's face scrunched in disbelief. "Jeff?" "Oh my gosh, you should have seen him with Dustin that first time we all went out. You would have thought he was part of the wallpaper." "I would never have pegged him for shy." "Ugh, no. Shy would have been a major step up." "Geez, what happened to him? I mean, I don't know that he's exactly outgoing, but he's certainly not bashful." Eve smiled, remembering Lisa's words from the cabin. She tightened her grip on AJ's arm. "He found Lise." They walked up to the baggage return and stopped. No part of Eve ever wanted to let go of him again. AJ dropped one of the bags to the floor. "I guess love can do amazing things to a person," he said, draping an arm around her when he straightened. That arm felt better than anything had in a very long time. "Yes, it can," she said, as she laid her hand on his chest, and nowhere in her was there any hesitation. It wasn't until they got to the little silver car in the parking garage that AJ felt the full brunt of being home again. Her bags were stowed in the trunk. At her door, knowing they weren't going to the same place, his heart yanked up into his throat. "Well," he said, reaching for her hand between them, "you drive careful." "You too," she said, gazing into his eyes as though her only hope was that he would find a way not to say goodbye. "I'll see you?" he asked, suddenly unsure of what was going to happen when he turned and walked away from her. "Yeah, I owe you a pizza, remember?" Softly, he smiled. "Yeah, seems like I remember that part." A moment, and he could stay away from her no longer. As she slid into his arms, even staying in that steamy parking garage forever seemed preferable to the alternative. He closed his eyes, imprinting her on his memory. Finally, the hug broke, and he looked at her uncertainly. "Can I call you?" "You better." What he wanted to do was to take her into his arms and tell her the rest of the world would just have to deal with it. What he did was lean into her and brush her lips with his. It certainly didn't help, but to just leave, to just walk away, was certain to kill him too. "I'll see you later?" he asked, leaning down so he could see her eyes as she ducked her head. She nodded and then turned to the car. He waited until she was in the driver's seat before he smiled and slammed her door. His car was on a different level, so he stood and waited with one small wave as she backed out and headed out of the parking garage. As his gaze fell to the 2 lone bags at his feet, ache traced through his heart. Their perfect weekend was over, and here he stood on the other side, wondering if the magic in the mountains could possibly survive in the real world of life. Reluctantly, he picked up his bags and headed for his own car. One day. It didn't seem like that big of a deal when Eve had called in to work to tell them she would be a day late. However, the moment she hit work the next morning, it was clear that one day made more difference than she had ever realized. "The spring show is Saturday," Mary Jo said as Eve sat in the conference room Wednesday morning. "Saturday, and we are not ready. We've got run-throughs tomorrow, and the way this is looking, we'll be lucky to have half of the show ready by then. So that we don't have to waste time in assignments, I've written them all out here." She handed a stack of papers out to the people on either side of her. Eve took one for herself and passed them on. As Mary Jo continued her diatribe, Eve's gaze took in how the hours of her life from now until the weekend would play out. Somehow, this job hadn't looked like so much work when she'd first gotten it. The others began standing around her, and Eve's concentration came back to reality. "And Eve?" Mary Jo said as the others began to disperse. "Yeah?" Eve asked. "I want you to be point person on this. Make sure that everyone else gets their part done. If they don't, do it." Eve nodded, even as her mind traced through the tasks that was going to mean would fall to her at the last of the last minutes. "I'm thinking about talking to the store manager about moving you up if you make this work," Mary Jo said. "I'll keep that in mind," Eve said shakily. The ramifications of where up could be shook her to the core, but she buried that. "I'll do my best." AJ hated rain, especially the kind that liked to fall when he wasn't totally sure where a call was located. True, he knew most of Houston by heart, but there were still a few streets that didn't just jump forth in his head when he heard them come over the radio, and a few that were so closely named that they interlaced in the files in his mind. "Are you sure this is right?" Lerone asked when they turned at an intersection. He looked behind him. "I think that sign said Commerce. We need Congress." "Commerce? Congress? Aren't they both right here?" AJ asked, fumbling through the memorized maps in his head as Lerone worked with a perpetually obnoxious GPS that had never worked quite right. "I think Congress must be the next street over, or 2 streets over," Lerone said as they got to an intersection clogged with vehicles. "Which way?" AJ asked. South, I think." Sirens going, AJ turned and fought his way through the traffic as he peered helplessly through the driving rain to see the next sign. His mind didn't have to see it. His heart felt the time sliding by. Franklin, crud, that's not it." "It's this next one," Lerone said, pointing ahead of them and giving up on the GPS completely. AJ picked his way forward, and relief poured over him at the sight of Congress Street. They turned into the traffic, stacked in all directions at a mid-afternoon standstill. "Go around them," Lerone said. "There's not room." Slowly the vehicles in front of them exited to the sides, affording space by little bits. "What's this block?" AJ asked, not wanting to take his gaze off the rain-streaked road. "We've got 2 more blocks," Lerone said. "Yep, there's the lights." "Thank God," AJ said, wondering how much more his nerves could possibly take. The ambulance came to a stop 6 cars back from the melee that had not so long before been a simple intersection. Throwing it into park, AJ grabbed his bag, jumped from his side, and followed Lerone, who was already several strides ahead of him on the sidewalk. Police, fire trucks, emergency workers were running in all directions. "Over here," one of the firefighters yelled, directing AJ into the center of the storm. "This one needs help." AJ banked to the right even as Lerone ran on. The woman who sat, leaning against the stoplight pole, had bloody trails streaming down her face as the firefighter kneeling next to her fought to keep her calm. For a moment, AJ wondered why the other 2 paramedic crews weren't attending to her. Then he realized that there were at least 4 cars smashed in the rain-blurred intersection. Multiple victims. How many and how bad? That was for others to sort out. His mission at this moment was to help this woman in front of him. "What do we got?" AJ asked, bending down as the rain slid through his hair. "Head gash," the firefighter said as AJ sat on his heels to examine the victim. "AJ?" He looked at the firefighter in full gear, and the face and voice slipped through his consciousness. Gabe. Recognition, and then something else. Not one part of him liked the look in Gabe's eyes. "Please," the woman wailed, pushing against Gabe's hands. "Please, I have to get to my baby." AJ refocused on the task in front of him. "Okay, listen, I need you to calm down, ma'am." "Her name's Serena," Gabe said, and as much as AJ hadn't liked the look in Gabe's eyes, he liked the tone of his voice even less. "Okay, Serena, I need you to take deep breaths for me." He tried to look at the gash across the right side of her head, but she wouldn't sit still. "I'm fine. Please, help them," she cried. "Please, I'm fine." "It's deep," AJ said to Gabe, who continued to pin the semi-struggling woman to the pole. "No, please, don't worry about me. Help them." "We need to clean this up so we can see what we need to get done," AJ said as the blood streamed down his gloves. Then, for a split second, his mind registered the long black hair and the angle of the nose. He shook his head to clear it of Eve's face. It wasn't Eve. Carefully, he worked with the wound, fighting to get the bleeding stopped. "Have they gotten them out yet?" the woman asked AJ, and the terror in her eyes ripped his heart out. "They're working on it," Gabe said. "They have to get them out. They have to." AJ pursed his lips so that his mind would stay on the task at hand. Through the hair, it was hard to tell how deep the gash was, but from the blood pouring out, it was a fair guess that it was far more than a scratch. "They said they were getting them out," she said, grabbing at AJ's hands. "But I haven't seen either of them. Can you see if they've gotten them out, please? I'm sure they're doing all they can, AJ said. Without a breakdown of the actual accident, his mind worked through the details. Gash on the right, she was probably in the passenger seat. Someone ran a red light, and the other cars hit hers in the driver's door. He could see the spidered glass of the passenger window, although he didn't bother to look. That's why they had gotten her out first. She was the easiest. But who else was in there? He fought not to think about it as his hands worked to stymie the blood. I think we'd have a better shot at this if we weren't on a street corner, he finally said to Gabe. Lerone ran by, headed back to the ambulance. Hey, Lerone, AJ called to him. We need help here. She's yours. We've got a mess up there, Lerone called back even as he kept running. AJ looked around and realized he was the help. What do you need? Gabe asked, looking up to him for guidance. We've got to get her back to the ambulance. Just tell me what to do. No, not pink, Eve said in frustration. I said fuchsia. Don't you know what fuchsia is? I'll work on it, the girl who looked half of Eve's age said, buckling backward. Do that. Eve glanced at her watch. It was after 3, and she hadn't had so much as a Cheeto since before 7 that morning. Ms. Knox, they told me I was supposed to tell you that one rack went through a mud puddle on the way in. They need to know what to do about it. A mud puddle? Oh, come on. What do they think this is, California? Haven't they ever dealt with rain before? She stomped off to solve the latest dilemma, grateful only for the fact that her dilemmas involved only mud-caked one-of-a-kind outfits instead of irreplaceable lives. How's her husband? AJ asked when they shut the doors so that the paramedic that had just arrived could work on the woman. Being 45 feet closer to getting out, she was better off going with that crew. Bad, Gabe said as they made their way back to the wreck. I'm not sure he's even got a chance, and the baby's worse. AJ glanced back at the closed doors that were slowly disappearing into the crowded street. The baby? He was in the back, Gabe said as they made their way back up to the scene. Driver's side. The little family picture from a cabin bedroom deep in the woods crashed into AJ's mind as his gaze took in the scene ahead of them. Rain slid down his face, soaking into his soul. AJ, Lerone called from where he was kneeling next to one of the victims. We need you, man! Without waiting for more of an update, AJ raced to the middle of the rain-soaked street. I'm here. Take over the chest, Lerone said as his hands worked to get air into the victim through the hand breather. AJ dropped to his knees on the other side of the immobile figure and found the compression area. 1, 2, 3. 2 models are out, Mary Jo said as she strode through the room where Eve was busy sorting through what could be washed, what couldn't be washed, and their options from there. Out? She asked through the pencil in her mouth. Asian flu. It's only Wednesday. Maybe they'll be better by Saturday. And maybe 6 more will go down between now and then. That's not even funny, Eve said, looking up from where she knelt on the cold concrete floor. I'm not laughing, Mary Jo said. 1, 2, 3. AJ continued to count as the rain dripped off his forehead onto the open shirt of the man lying on the street. Minutes and minutes had elapsed since AJ had heard a heartbeat. In truth, there hadn't been one since he'd started, but still he worked, willing his own life into this body. He bent down to listen between the artificial breaths. There's no pulse, the EMT that AJ had taken over for said. We need to get him into a transport, Lerone said. 1, 2, 3. AJ pushed his determination into the task as in his mind a plea for assistance from above slipped through him. AJ, man, they're here with the transport, Lerone said. AJ! He knew what backing up meant. 10, 11, 12. AJ, that's enough, man. Let's get him in the transport. 14, 15, AJ said as tears blurred through the rain. Let's get him on this, a paramedic AJ knew he should know instructed. On 3. 1, 2, 3. The man was transferred to the gurney, and the emergency workers continued to work on him as they wheeled him away. A hollow emptiness filled the center of AJ's chest. Promises, some sincere, some meant only to calm an inconsolable person, flowed through his soul. "We'll do everything we can. He's in good hands. We'll take care of him." They weren't promises. They were lies. All of them. "AJ, they've got 2 out on the other side. Let's go," Lerone said, clapping him on the back as he knelt in the street, now awash in rainwater. Pushing through the overwhelming fatigue dripping off his soul, AJ pulled first one leg, then the other, under him. Hazy numbness overtook him as he stepped up to the group knotted on the other side of the cars. His mind wouldn't think, and worse, he couldn't really tell that it wasn't. "No," someone from the knot said. "There's no use. He's gone." When they backed up, AJ saw the tiny form, looking all but lost in the sea of giants surrounding him. His heart collapsed over the sight. How old, he didn't know, but certainly not old enough to die like this. Tears and emotion collapsed over him. Suddenly, he couldn't breathe. "AJ," Lerone called from farther up the street. "AJ, man, get in the game! We need you!" Squelching all of the pain, he sniffed back the tears, pulled indifference to him, and raced over to where Lerone was working. "This makes no sense," the young girl holding the 3 outfits up for Eve's inspection said at just past 7. "I can't find these on the schedule anywhere." "Maybe they're extras," Eve said, her energy long since gone. "I don't think so. They were with the show clothes." "You have your list?" "Right here." The girl handed the list over to Eve. "Marcia, you coming?" another employee asked as she walked by. The young girl holding the outfits looked around. "Oh, yeah." Without so much as asking, she hung the outfits on the end of the rack. "Let me get my purse." "But," Eve started as she looked up from the list 2 moments too late. She looked at the outfits, then at the list, then at the completely empty room around her. Slowly, she shook her head. "I sure hope up is worth this." AJ had been home almost 2 hours, but nothing held his attention. Television was a waste of time. He'd burned himself cooking a TV dinner in the microwave. Even the drum set had no beat. His heart hurt. Every piece of him hurt. He tried to call Jeff's place, but of course no one was home. He called Melody, but she was working. Finally, he rolled across the bed, grabbed the phone, and after dialing, he ran his fingers through his hair that had dried in no discernible pattern. The click of her machine snapped through him, and her voice, soft and gentle, washed through his soul. He considered leaving a message, but what could he say? "I need you?" That was completely lame. So, quickly, he hung up, vaguely wondering where she was. She hadn't mentioned any big plans she had for the evening, but then again, he hadn't asked. In fact, he wasn't even sure that now that they were back home, what anything that had to do with her meant to his life. Were they a couple now? And if they were, did that give him the right to ask where she would be, when? It wasn't so much that he wanted to know where she was to keep tabs on her. It was more that he felt empty, not knowing. Trying to block her and everything else out, he closed his eyes and forced himself to drift. However, he hadn't gone very far when images began to collide in his brain. The street, Lisa's smile as she held Alex for the first time, the woman bleeding and yet begging for him to help her family, the tiny bundle on the street, Jeff holding Lisa and thanking AJ for all he had done. And then, further back to long before he really even knew Lisa, he remembered how scared her voice was on that phone call, how he had wished he didn't have to tell her that Jeff was bad, that she needed to come to the emergency room right away. Then, suddenly, he was back on a darkened street, feeling the sheer invincibility of someone who had yet to lose a patient on their watch. What a joke that was! What a cruel hoax! That night, he hadn't hesitated to assure Jeff. But it wasn't so much the promises as much as his own belief in them that now cut him to the core. "He's in good hands. I promise we'll do everything we can." The promises, although vague, held out a thread of hope that AJ's soul now said was simply a stark lie. For when everything they could do wasn't enough? What then? When hope surrendered, what then? When they packed up their medical supplies and went home, what did they leave for those to whom those false promises had been made? Although he didn't want to think about it, he knew. He knew because she had told him. I'd lie there in the floor for hours and cry. She thought he was so courageous that he could do the all but impossible, her white knight. That was the cruelest joke of them all. He was no white knight swooping in to save the day. No, he had failed her. Even before he knew her, he had failed her. His mind slipped back to a graveyard and the sight of the coffin resting for a time over a newly dug grave. All the what-ifs attacked him at once, but they all led him right back to had he done things differently, the image of that beautiful face fighting back overwhelming tears might never have happened. Guilt spread through him, and in a poor attempt to thwart it, he rolled off the bed. He was the only one who knew. If she knew what he knew, she would never want to see him again, and he didn't blame her one bit. At 11:30, Eve sighed in resignation. There was simply no more she could do tonight. With her purse tucked in one hand and her pepper spray in the other, she exited the building and crossed to her car. Once inside, she punched the button on the player and revved the engine. What was that little drumming thing that AJ did with his fingers while he drove? She tried to tap out the beat, but couldn't quite catch it. Despite the futileness of the attempt, she smiled. Through the nighttime Houston streets she drove, feeling in her heart that somehow he would call tonight. Or maybe he already had, and he'd left a message. She couldn't wait to talk to him, to tell him about her day, to hear him assure her that she could in fact make this work. That would be nice, because right now it seemed almost as daunting as delivering a baby in the very center of nowhere. However, when she got home, there was no message. Sad, but trying not to be, she went to the refrigerator and pulled out some ham. He had work today, too, and it wasn't like she had told him to call her. In fact, as she thought about it, she wasn't even sure he had her number. Well, sometimes you have to do things for yourself, she thought as she pulled the phone book from the drawer. She sat down at the table and ran a finger down the listings for night. Unfortunately, she didn't know his mother's name, and there was no listing for AJ, or even A. After 3 trips down night and the names on either side of it, she gave up. It was after midnight anyway. Tomorrow she would find him, if her body was still moving by that point. And, with that thought, she went to take a shower. The next night, when Eve arrived home long after 1 in the morning, elation surged through her when she saw the blink on her machine. However, when she punched the button, it wasn't AJ she heard, but Ashley. Hey, Eve, we're meeting over at Jeff and Lisa's tomorrow night at 7 for a surprise welcome home party. Of course you're invited. Hope to see you there. And she was gone. Yeah, Eve thought. I hope to see me there too. 3 times in 2 days, AJ had squandered the opportunity to leave a message on her machine. He simply didn't know what to say. There were the feelings from the mountain that still brought a smile, but underneath those was the distinct possibility that his first words to her would come out, "I'm so sorry. You have every right to hate me." Every time her voice drifted over the lines, his rational instinct took over and he hung up. So, he was at least mildly excited when Ashley called to tell him about the welcome home party. It was a given that she would be there. Nonetheless, what he would say and how he would say it kept him awake long into the Thursday night as the Nerf football made its arcs into the dark night around him. "I didn't say 7. I said 700, Eve said into the phone at 6 o'clock on Friday evening. No, how are we supposed to feed 200 people with 7 slices of ham? Turkey? Yes, they ordered turkey too. Well, my list clearly says turkey. What, are we going to have to go down this thing item for item? She put her hand to her head as the frustration from the previous 3 days came to the surface in a growl. How about we just start over? Would that help? Fine. Great. Let's start over." "Surprise!" the three of them semi-yelled when Jeff appeared at the front door of their house. "Hey," he said as a smile that knifed through AJ crossed onto his face. "I was wondering when we'd see you guys." "We couldn't stay away," Ashley said. She reached up from her stance on the top step and hugged Jeff. "Now, where is that baby?" Jeff laughed and pointed through the entryway. Then he held out a hand to Gabe. "Somehow I knew you were going to figure out a way to get out of coming back on time," Gabe said, clapping a hand over the elbow attached to the hand he was shaking. "And now I'm guessing you're going to want your 2 weeks off, too." "You know it," Jeff said, laughing. "Come on in." Timidly, AJ stood on the bottom step, the gift he had been forced to get and wrap on his own tucked under his arm. "AJ," Jeff said happily, and then his smile fell into concern as he looked around the otherwise empty sidewalk. "Where's Eve?" He shrugged as the same question traced through him. "Ash invited her. I figured she'd be here." More concern traced through Jeff's face, and then he forced a brighter look onto his face. "Well, then I'm sure she's on her way. Come on in." "And Eve about flipped out," Lisa said as Gabe and Ashley sat on the couch, her arm over his leg, listening to the winding tale of baby Alex's arrival. "Well, I don't blame her," Ashley said. "Ugh, I would have been a basket case." "How far along were you?" Gabe asked, clearly calculating in his head. 36 weeks, Lisa said, readjusting the pacifier in Alex's mouth. "Man, I would have been doing more than flipping out," he said. "Them babies aren't supposed to be coming that early." "Yeah, that was the first thing Gabe said when you called," Ashley said. "He was like, she had to be like 4 weeks early, and 4 weeks at that point can make a huge difference. How much did he weigh anyway?" 5.5, Lisa said, "but everything is perfectly wonderful." Ashley smiled. "I can see that." "Okay, emergency training is one thing, but that's like in a whole nother ballgame," Gabe said skeptically. "Didn't you guys freak out?" "I did," Jeff said from his recliner as he looked over at his family, now safe and sound. "But AJ, man, he never so much as blinked." Gabe smiled over at AJ, who was having trouble keeping himself from running far and fast. "That doesn't surprise me. AJ's like, blood? Ah, no big deal." "Could we not say the B word?" Ashley asked, obviously sickened by just the thought. "Sorry," Gabe said to her as he laid an arm over her shoulders. "No, you should have seen him," Jeff said. "Okay, first we do this, then we do this. Let me tell you, if I'm ever in need of emergency help again, he's the one I'm going to call." The image of a woman pleading for her husband's life met in the middle of the rain-streaked image of a man who AJ had no power to bring back. "Lisa and Eve did it all. I didn't do that much." "He kept me sane," Jeff said, tipping his glass at AJ. "That's enough to test anybody," Gabe said. "I'm not arguing," Jeff said. Then Jeff's face fell with concern. "By the way, where is Eve?" "I don't know," Ashley said. "I called her and left a message. I tried calling her again last night late, but she wasn't home." AJ caught the worry in Lisa's gaze when she looked at Ashley. "You didn't get a hold of her?" "I just figured she'd be here," Ashley continued. Lisa's gaze jumped from Ashley to AJ, and suddenly he realized what she was asking him with no words. "I tried too," he said, tripping over the words, "but I never could get her." There was a long moment of silence as AJ realized he should have tried harder, much harder. "I'll go try again." He felt the 4 gazes follow him out. "No, don't even," Eve warned. "We've got less than 24 hours, and now you're telling me that we're down to 5 models, and one of them is iffy?" "We called as soon as we found out," the agent said. "They were all on that shoot together last weekend. They must have gotten something from the water." The water. That was the very last excuse she wanted to hear. "Okay, let me get this straight. The show is tomorrow, and I'm down to 4 models who may or may not have been exposed to this thing. She growled in utter frustration. Let me make some calls, see who I can round up, but if I can't come up with enough, I'm calling you back. What am I supposed to do? Find me some models. She hit the off button, fuming. This is not happening. Her hand grabbed for the phone book and flipped through the yellow pages to the listing for models. How she wished she lived in Hollywood or New York. There she could have come up with models by squeezing the woodwork. Here, it wasn't nearly so easy. Her finger traced down her options, just as her cell phone bleeped to life. Absently, she hit the button. Knox. Geez, if I didn't know any better, I'd think you were delivering another baby, AJ's voice said over the air, and without hesitation, she leaned back in her chair and breathed in the sound. If I didn't know any better, I think I was too, she said with a smile. We thought you'd be here, AJ said, and Eve looked at her watch in resignation. 9:45. Oh, man, she sat forward. Believe me, I wanted to be. Where are you? Working. This stupid spring show is tomorrow morning, and I'm beginning to wish I had the Asian flu. Hey, don't say that. The hospitals are filling with it. Tell me about it. They took half of my models hostage already. Oh, man, what a drag. She shook her head. I'm afraid I'm out for tonight. You're going to have to celebrate without me. That wouldn't be much of a celebration, he said, and she heard the disappointment in his voice. As strange as it was, that made her heart skip a beat. How are Jeff and Lisa? Good. Wondering where you are, though. I wish I could be there, but the way this is looking, I may have to pull an all-nighter the way it is. Thankful for the distraction after 3 solid days of problems, she leaned back in the chair. How are you? Cool. Things are right back to normal. I thought about calling you the other night, but I didn't have your number. You were going to call me? It was midnight, and I didn't have anything better to do. Have you ever heard of a little thing called sleep? Seems like I remember that part, but at this point it's been so long, I don't think I'd even know how to do that anymore. You need a break. Tomorrow I'm on all day. Sunday I'll think about taking a break. How does rollerblading sound? It's January. Less traffic on the sidewalks. I can pick you up if you want. You need directions? Nah, I'll just follow the sound of help. Very funny, she said laughingly. If I was there, I'd hit you. Then I'm very glad you couldn't make it tonight. Oh, that was cruel. You wait. Believe me, I have been, he said, and his tone yanked the smile right off her face. Me too. When they signed off and Eve hung up the phone, she wondered what kind of strange power he had over her. Just hearing his voice could pull her back from insanity's brink. She looked over the project on her desk, and although not one thing about it had changed, she now had a point to focus on beyond tomorrow morning. Sunday. She couldn't wait. That one on Wednesday must have been rough, Jeff said as he and AJ stood in the kitchen rounding up snacks for the others. When AJ looked over at him in confusion, Jeff nodded out to the living room. Gabe told me. AJ scratched the back of his head. Yeah, it was. He pulled cookies out of the bag he was holding as he felt the words trace across his soul. Sometimes it gets to me, he said, feeling like he needed to tell somebody that before it exploded inside of him. Being out there, wishing I could do more, and knowing there's nothing I can really do. Jeff's gaze lost all the teasing in it. You can't do everything every time. I wish I could. If you didn't, you wouldn't be out there in the first place. You know, sometimes it's in the cards. Sometimes it's not, but you just have to do the best you can with what you're dealt. Then I wish the dealer was always on my side. Sometimes I get the feeling that he isn't. The smile Jeff gave him was sympathetic. We all do. We all wish every call could turn out perfectly, that we could save everybody. But just because we can't, That doesn't mean he isn't with us on every call. It's just that sometimes he has a different plan than we wish he had." Slowly, AJ arranged the cookies on the plate. "So, have you ever regretted doing this?" He needed an answer, a reason to go on, or better yet, a reason to quit. Jeff glanced over, and then his gaze found the countertop. "Once." AJ nodded, fully comprehending the depth of that single syllable. "I wish I could go back and do that night all over again." "Yeah, you and me both," Jeff said. Then he shook his head. "But going back isn't what life's about. You've got to do your best with right now and let the past take care of the past. Like last week, I would have totally lost it if you hadn't been there." "I didn't." "Yes, you did. For me and my family, you did more than we could ever even thank you for." Jeff's gaze burrowed through AJ. "And just so you know, while you're busy remembering those that didn't work out, be sure to remember the ones that did, okay?" After a moment, AJ nodded, hearing the wisdom in that, but knowing it wasn't that simple. "Man, that looks really good," Gabe said, slapping AJ on the back and causing him to jump. "But you know where it would really look good?" "Where's that?" Jeff asked. "Out here where the rest of us can eat it." "You better watch it," Jeff said, turning with the tray of food in his hands. "You're starting to sound like AJ." "You say that like it's a bad thing," Gabe said, and this time he didn't sound like he was teasing at all.
Like and subscribe to the Staci Stallings YouTube channel so you never miss a second of the story.
Chapter 19. "Is that your traffic stopping shirt?" AJ asked when he and Eve were sitting on the park bench lacing up their rollerblades. "You don't like my shirt?" Eve asked, pulling the fluorescent orange shirt out from her body. "I'm not getting close to you. They could land airplanes on that thing." "Oh, yeah? You better be nice to me, or else... Or else what?" "Or else." His gaze slipped over to her skeptically. "Ooh, I'm scared." "Well, you should be." She pulled one rollerblade out of her pack and bent to put it on. "Orange?" he asked, stopping his own lacing efforts incredulously. "What's the matter with orange?" "You have shoelaces that match your shirt." "That's a problem?" "My shoelaces don't even match each other." "That doesn't surprise me," she said, lacing quickly. "Clothes aren't exactly your top priority." "Not high enough to get shoelaces on my rollerblades to match my outfit, they're not." She set about tying the second one. "Yeah, you're doing good if your pants match the rest of your outfit." "Outfit? I never thought about this being an outfit." He put on his sunglasses and stood from the bench, barely catching his balance. Flailing his arms, he finally stopped. He struck a half pose. "AJ's ensemble today is a fetching pair of baggy jeans with frays in all the right places. Now, not machine-made frays, mind you, but real, honest-to-goodness, he's worn these things a million times frays, coupled with a trendy yet casual jersey from the University of North Carolina." He held out his hands as if to show off his clothes, but his skate slipped again, and he almost went down as he turned his shoulders to model his shirt. "Oh, and don't forget the ever-popular, yet so seldom worn right accessory, the ever-present backward baseball cap," Eve said with amusement as she stood from the bench and checked her own balance. "Of course. What outfit would be complete without it?" he asked, holding his balance by the throat. She looked down at herself. "Aw, man." "What's the matter?" he asked in instant concern. "I forgot mine." Her gaze jumped to him as she skated the 2 steps to his side. "I guess I'll just have to take yours." With that, she whipped his hat off his head and took off down the sidewalk. "Hey, hey!" he yelled, barely keeping his balance as he tried to turn, lunge for the hat, and catch her at the same time. "You want it?" she asked, skating backward tauntingly. "You're going to have to come get it." She slipped it onto her head, pulling her hair back and down with it as she put it on backward. "Well, then, slow down," he said, obviously trying to get his skating legs under him. "What's the matter? This can't be any harder than moguls, and you're an expert at those." "I've never actually done this before, though," he said. "You haven't roller skated?" "When I was 7. She shrugged, liking how out of control he looked. "It's just like riding a bike." He managed to stay upright, although he didn't look like a natural as he followed her down the sidewalk. "You should have warned me." "About what?" "About the fact that I was stupid enough to ask a world-class skater out to rollerblade." Ah, poor AJ, finally met his match. "Just wait until I get you on some water skis. Then we'll see who's met their match." Slowing down a fraction, she closed some of the distance between them. "It would help if you'd pick up your other leg." "I am." "No, up. This isn't up." She demonstrated his contrived form of skating. "Up? Like this?" He did as instructed. However, he jerked his body to get it done, which threw him off balance. "Ah!" In the next second, he face-planted in the grass. Laughing, she clapped as she switched directions and skated back to him. "Well, that was graceful." "Hey, did I say I was good at this?" he asked, rolling over and reaching up for her hand. "If you did, you were lying." She reached down and pulled him to his unsteady feet. In an instant, her comprehension pulled in the fact that he was only inches away, closer than he had been since they'd left New Mexico. His smile slipped through her heart even as he held onto her for balance. "Nice hat," he said, gazing up at it. "I thought so." She reached up and touched it. It wasn't that she thought about it before that exact moment, but she simply couldn't take the distance between them any longer. Leaning just far enough so that she could find his lips, she brushed across them. However, one touch only brought a need for more. Suddenly, all she wanted was to get closer to him, and for 1 second too long, that desire took over the laws of physics as she pressed into him. By the time her brain kicked in to warn her, it was too late. "Ah!" she yelped, fighting to keep her balance even as they went down. In the next second, they were lying on the grass next to the sidewalk. Embarrassment, humiliation, mortification. They should have been yanking her up off the trail, off of him. But none of them were anywhere to be seen. In fact, who happened by to see them, she really didn't care. She wanted to shout to the world how she felt, and this was as good of a way to do that as any. Gently, she ran a hand over the spikes of blonde-toned hair. "That was graceful," he said as one of his arms came around her back. "You thought so?" she asked, with no hint of anything other than intensity. "How about this?" No other move she had ever made with a guy had been so bold as she draped herself right over his body, making it nearly impossible for him to even move. Her skate clunked on the concrete as she meshed her lips with his. A moment, another, until she was spinning on the feeling of his lips on hers, his body cradled in the protection of hers, his hand sliding up and down her back in perfect rhythm to the day around them. When she pulled back and looked at him, what she could see of his face held pure disbelief. "I think we should go skating more often," he said. "Oh yeah? Why's that?" "It's kind of fun watching an expert at work." "Watch and learn," she said as she pressed her lips to his again. AJ could have stayed right there the rest of the day and not had any complaints. However, his senses finally kicked in when he heard the jogger's footfalls on the sidewalk. "Okay," he said, pushing up from the ground as he pushed her off of him. "Break's over." "Aw," she pouted. "I was enjoying the break." "Yeah, well, if you're really lucky, I might just go down for good next time." She laughed as she rolled away from him. "Want some help?" "No," he said as he struggled to his feet. "I think I'm perfectly capable of crashing on my own." "Chicken." Casually, she dusted off her pants when she was back on her skates. "Smart," he said, catching his balance. "They call it smart." She laughed. "Then here, how about I teach you to skate?" His gaze slid across hers skeptically. "Do I dare trust you?" "Do you have a choice?" Laughing, he put his hand in hers and turned his skates up the sidewalk with her. It took several strides, but his body finally caught on to the cadence of hers, and his strides lengthened. "So, how'd the show go?" "Oh, geez. Let's put it this way. For a while there, I thought I was going to have to call you to come model." "Me?" His skate slipped, but he caught it. "You couldn't be that desperate." "You didn't see me yesterday." She skated with no hesitation. "I hated to miss the party. How are Gabe and Ashley?" "Glad they didn't come with us, I think." Questioningly, she looked at him. "Ashley has this thing about blood." "Ah," Eve said, with complete understanding. "I used to know someone like that." "Oh, who would that be?" "I think you know her," she said. "She's this really cool person. Skates like a dream. Skis like a... Well, we won't talk about that." "Likes to shop and take people's heads off while they're dancing?" "Oh, so you know her?" He couldn't have squelched the smile had he wanted to. "Yeah, I think we've met." It was after 7 when they made it back to Eve's place, pizza and movie in hand. She pulled a piece out for him as he worked with the player. "Have you ever noticed how much better pizza tastes when you aren't sitting at a table?" she asked as she took a bite of his and then handed it to him when he sat down next to the chair. "Hey, you ate mine." "Sorry," she said. "I was hungry." "Good thing I didn't wear you out too bad, or I might not get anything." "I have a feeling that would never happen," she said, sliding over so that she could lean against the same footrest as he was using. "I know how you are with food." "Yeah, the same way I used to be with hats, until somebody stole mine." "I look better in it than you do," she said as she reached up and ran her hand over the black cap. "That wouldn't be hard." "Shh, the movie's starting." Midway through the movie, Eve had given up and laid down on the floor, using AJ's leg for a pillow. Where it flowed out from under the cap, her hair streamed over the frays in his jeans, and his heart missed a beat every time he noticed it. Jeff was right. All the beauty that she possessed was nothing compared with the woman that she was inside. Without asking permission, his hand laid on the bright orange sleeve and ran itself down the length of her arm, just past her elbow, and then back. Just touching her like this made the rest of his senses stand up and take notice. After several minutes, he felt her relax, and then her shoulders dropped for the last time. He didn't have to look to know she was asleep. She'd had a hard week. He couldn't blame her for being exhausted. He thought about her skating like she was born on rollerblades, and he smiled. She seemed to have no qualms whatsoever in trying something new, and, more astounding, no hesitation in being with him. It was a feeling he could get used to. At that moment, his gaze slid from her to the television, and then it snagged on the crystal rose looking down at them from the mantel. Funny, he didn't remember it looking quite so ominous the last time he was here. His hand stopped its exploration of her arm. "You know, this wasn't my idea," he said under his breath to the rose. "I didn't know this was going to happen." "Look at her, AJ. She trusts you," the rose said in the back of his head. "And what have you done? You've lied to her over and over again. Just being with her like this is a lie." "I didn't lie. I haven't told her everything." "Haven't? Like you ever intended to. Face it, you lied and you know it. Look at her. She thinks you're this goody-goody white knight riding in to rescue everybody. What a joke. That's why you don't want to tell her the truth. She might see what you really are." "What?" he asked fearfully. "A coward. That's what. A coward who had the chance to save the man she really loved. And what did you do? You let him die." "I did my best." "Well, your best wasn't good enough, was it? Dustin's the one who should be with her right now, not you. You don't deserve her. You don't deserve her trust or her love. And you know it, too. That's why you won't tell her." "I will," he said pleadingly. "I will tell her." "Yeah, right. Once a coward, always a coward. Besides, what makes you think she won't hate you forever if you do? Because she believes in me now. No, she believes in who she thinks you are. But you haven't had the guts to show her who you really are, have you? No, look at you, you coward. You won't even tell her you love her because you're afraid of what she would say. You're afraid she'd laugh in your face. And you know what? She probably would. AJ tore his gaze from the rose, and it fell to her. The sight burned his lungs. As much as he wanted to bury that voice, run a sieve through it and drop it off a cliff, he knew it was right. Dustin should be here, camped out in the living room floor, holding his wife. Not him, some poor imposter who was an inferior substitute at best, a bald-faced liar at worst. He didn't want to wake her up, but he had to get away before the lies between them pulled her down with him. Carefully, he moved one leg that instantly screamed in pain, his chest filled with sticky cotton, clinging to every air space available when she moaned in protest. "Shh," he said, bending over her and willing her to go back to sleep. However, she rolled over to her back when her head was on the floor and looked up at him blankly. "Where are you going?" "Home," he whispered. In confusion, she turned her head and looked at the television. "The movie's not even over yet." "Yeah, but you need some sleep." Blearily, she smiled. "I was." "I noticed." His smile was weaker than hers as he brushed the hair back from her face. "Get some rest. I'll call you." "Promise?" "Yeah, I promise," he said, not meaning a single word. Gently he bent and brushed his lips on hers, knowing it was goodbye, feeling that goodbye slice him in two. Then, knowing he had no other choice, he pulled back, stood, and let himself out, not trusting even a backward glance. Just after 2, Eve awoke again, and for a moment she thought his departure was only a dream. However, she could feel the emptiness of the apartment around her. Slowly, she pushed herself upright, stood, and walked to the television that was still flashing incoherent pictures. With a sleep-heavy hand, she snapped it off, and the little nightlight on the mantel snapped on in the darkness. Solemn peace slipped through her as she gazed at the rose. "You know I never planned on this," she said, running a gentle finger over the iridescent colors. "But I can't deny it any more. I love him, Dustin. I think I have for a long time. I know he's not you, and he never will be. But with him, I think I can finally move on." "Life is yours to live, Eve. Don't miss this chance living in the past with me. This moment is as precious as that one we had." Her gaze dropped to the darkness at her feet. "I won't forget you." "Hey, it's not goodbye," Dustin said softly. "It's never goodbye. Only until I see you again, remember?" The warmth of the smile spread through her. "I love you, you know that." "I know. That's why I have to let you go. You deserve to live." "With AJ?" "With whoever you choose." "I choose AJ." "Then he's one lucky guy." The whole world felt so heavy to AJ. Without her, there was a denseness that hadn't been there before. It hurt to simply put his feet on the floor the next morning, and the ache had nothing to do with yesterday's skating excursion. At the mirror, he ran a hand over the scratchy stubble covering his jawline. No one had to tell him he looked like a mess. He was, and he knew it. Thing was, at the moment, he couldn't have cared less. "Well, after Saturday, I would have thought you'd look like the devil," Mary Jo said when Eve breezed into the room on her way to her drawing table Monday morning. "It's a wonderful day, don't you think?" Eve asked, swinging her briefcase to the table. Mary Jo looked at her skeptically. "A wonderful day? Okay, who are you and what have you done with a real Eve? You know her, the one who usually looks like death barely warmed over?" "She decided to come back to the land of the living." "By choice?" Eve smiled throughout her whole spirit. "You always have a choice." AJ tried not to think about her. In the garage, he turned the music up to the point that hearing loss was more than a possibility. The drumsticks reverberated through the nerves in his hands as he pounded on the drums in front of him. But no matter how hard he beat, she was right there every time he closed his eyes. In stone-faced denial, he switched over to the hardest heavy metal CD he owned and poured himself into the beat. All through supper, Eve sat watching the phone, willing it to ring. She couldn't wait to talk to him, to tell him about her upcoming promotion to head her own department, girls' footwear and leisure wear. There was something appropriate about it, she thought with satisfaction. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 when she first started dreaming of being the one who decided what went on those racks. Now, here she was, living her dream in more ways than she could ever have imagined. "You're not going out tonight?" AJ's mom asked when he flopped on the couch to watch television with her on Wednesday night. "Not planning on it. Why?" "You just haven't been here much lately, and now I can't get you to leave. I figured you'd be itching to get out of here, go out on one of your adventures." He tried to settle in on the couch. "Nope, I'm not going anywhere anytime soon." "No L.A.? "Nope, no more L.A.s. I've learned my limitations." Concern descended across her features. "Limitations? I've never heard you use that word before." "Well, there's a first time for everything." When Jeff called on Friday night, begging for a fourth hand, AJ wasn't about to give in to the overwhelming temptation to throw rational out the window and just go. No, for her sake, he wasn't going there again. She deserved better, and he was determined that she would have it. "I can't," he said, rushing through the words. "I've got plans." "Oh," Jeff said, and AJ knew what Jeff thought those plans were. "Well, have fun." "Yeah, I will." The phone dropped back to the cradle, and AJ looked at it with a hard, cold stare. With a yank, he pulled it up to his ear and dialed the number. "Mel, hey, you got plans tonight?" "Well, you do now." By Friday evening when Eve got home, she knew something was drastically wrong. He hadn't called, and it had been more than 5 days, although it felt more like 5 lifetimes. The phone book was pointless, information wasn't any better. Finally, her heart needed to know that he was all right, more than her mind needed to not feel like an idiot. Standing by the door down the hall, she took a deep breath and reached up and knocked on it. Her gaze traced back to the steps, and again she prayed he was all right. Quickly, she knocked again. "Yes?" The half-inch of face lodged between the door, the frame, and the chain asked uncertainly. Eve cleared her throat. "Hi, you probably don't remember me, but I live just down the hall. I'm the one AJ left that box with that time." "Yes?" "Well, I just wanted to know if you've heard anything about him. I'm a little worried." "About AJ?" the face said. "Why?" "Well, he hasn't called me. He told me he would, but he hasn't. I don't have his number, and I just wanted to make sure that he was okay and everything." Doubt was all Eve could see. "He lives with my mom." "I know, but I don't know her name, and he's not listed in the phone book. I just remember that he was your brother, and I thought maybe you might know something." She realized this conversation was headed nowhere. "That's okay, I just thought—" The door slammed closed, and her heart slammed with it. Then she heard the chain, and hope flooded through her when the door opened. "Please, come in," Chelsea said softly, and Eve's heart went out to her. A young girl out on her own for the first time. Eve knew what that was like. "Thanks," she said as she ducked into the apartment. When the door closed, Eve pulled her hair back from her eyes and faced Chelsea. The resemblance to AJ threatened to rip her in two. I know you probably think I've lost my mind, and maybe I have, but AJ was here on Sunday, and he said he'd call. At least, I think he said he'd call. But he hasn't, and I was wondering if something happened to him or something." Chelsea's petite, soft features fell with concern. "Well, I haven't talked to him in a while. I talked to Mom mostly, but she never said anything." "Oh, well, I'm sure everything's all right. I don't have his number, so I couldn't call and ask for myself." "Oh, I can give it to you." Chelsea grabbed a piece of paper from the cabinet and scrawled the number on it. Then, just before she handed it to Eve, she stopped and surveyed her seriously. "You aren't the one he went skiing with, are you?" "Yeah," Eve said, and just the memory brought a half-smile to her face. "I am." "Oh," Chelsea said knowingly. Then she smiled. "Then I know he wouldn't mind." She handed the number over to Eve, whose gaze snagged on a picture on the wall just beyond Chelsea. It was of Chelsea and AJ, younger by about 10 years. Until that moment, Eve hadn't realized the depths to which she had missed that face. "AJ is really a great guy," Chelsea said, hinting very carefully. "He seems all run out and do whatever you want, but sometimes he can be so sweet, he'll blow you away." "Yeah," Eve said, staring at the picture, wondering why he hadn't called, and knowing exactly what Chelsea was talking about. One more moment, and she wished she could take that picture with her. "Well, I'd better get going. Thanks for the number." "Any time," Chelsea said as she made their way to the door. "Oh, and stop by and talk sometime. I have a feeling we won't just be neighbors forever." Although Eve said thanks, she wondered at that statement. 5 days ago, she had hoped that was exactly where this was going. Today, she was far less sure. Number in hand, she went back to her apartment and slipped inside. She wouldn't let him slip away quite so easily. "Isn't this great?" AJ asked, tipping his third bottle of beer up at their table when Melody's 2 friends had left with other guys to go dance. "Yeah, great," Melody said, obviously not thrilled. "You know, it's not that I don't like going out with you or anything, but what's up anyway? You haven't called me in like weeks, and now all of a sudden you have this burning desire to go out partying." AJ looked at her, his eyes already blurring from the alcohol. "I'm sorry, Mel, I should have called. I've just been busy with other things." "Other things?" "Uh-huh. And this wouldn't have anything to do with that girl we saw here that night, would it?" "Me and a girl?" He tipped the bottle up again. "Come on, you know me better than that." "I thought I did," she said quietly as he stopped a waitress to ask for another beer. "You know, I warned you about that one." "You know, Mel, you're not exactly helping here." The waitress set another bottle in front of him, and after paying for it, he downed about half of it without coming up for air. Melody's face sank further into confusion. "We could talk about it, you know. Video games aren't my only specialty." "Talk? There's nothing to talk about. Besides, I'd rather dance," he said, standing and trying not to wobble. She hesitated another second and finally shook her head and stood. "Hello, Mrs. Knight?" Eve said into the phone shakily. "I was wondering if AJ might happen to be there." "No, I'm sorry. AJ left a couple of hours ago with Melody and some of her friends. They were going out partying or clubbing or whatever they call it nowadays." "Oh," Eve said as the air in her lungs vanished. "I could give him a message if you want." She wanted to, more than living to the next moment she wanted to. However, it was abundantly clear that he was fine, and he had her number, and he had chosen not to call for a whole week. "No, that's okay, thanks." When she hung up the phone, Eve folded herself into the chair as anger and hurt flooded over her. She wanted to tell herself it was okay, that he'd just forgotten. But how could that be when every single waking and even many non-waking moments she was thinking about no one other than him? How could he just forget about her? "You always have a choice." His voice floated over her. He had a choice, and it was obvious that he had made that choice. Why? She couldn't find an answer to that question, but denying it made sense to nothing other than her heart. As the thoughts streamed through her, she curled up tighter in the chair and sank into the misery. "I'm fine," AJ said, swaying dangerously when they exited the club at just after 2. "Why, you think I'm wasted or something?" "I'm doing more than thinking it," Melody said, practically carrying him across the parking lot. Her friends had gone home hours before, but AJ had insisted that they stay for just one more, which turned into 7 or 8 more. That understanding was no longer in his memory. Neither was anything else. "Here, give me your keys," Melody said, holding out her hand. "My keys?" he asked incredulously. He held them just out of her reach. "My keys, my car, my drive." "I don't think so." She tried to grab them, but that move threatened to land both of them on the asphalt. "Why not? You don't think I can drive?" he asked teasingly. And then something far down reached up and grabbed him. "What? You don't trust me?" "Not in this shape, I don't," Melody said. "That hurts, Mel. It really does." "Yeah, well, tough. Give me your keys." She lunged after them again, falling into him in the process. He caught her under one arm. "You know, if I didn't know better, I'd think you wanted more than my keys," he said, turning sad, drunk puppy dog eyes on her. "Hardly." Her body caught his as he stumbled into her. "Why not? It wouldn't be the first pass you made at me." She fought to keep him upright as they crossed between 2 cars. "I was 4, she said irritably, "and it was a mistake even then. Besides, right now, you're not exactly a catch." Her hand grabbed him and stayed his movement as a car passed by in front of them. "Now, give me your keys before you get us both killed." "What? You don't like me now? Is that it?" he asked, and anger flashed to the surface. "If I didn't like you, I would let you drive," she said as they reached his car. "Now give me those keys." He staggered to the driver's door as Melody managed to slip between him and it. For a moment, words went through his head with no real destination. Then, through the slow blink of his eyes, he looked at the girl standing in front of him. Images slashed over images so that he couldn't be sure who she was. "Please don't be mad at me," he said softly as he reached up and ran a hand over her bleach blonde locks. "I didn't mean for it to be like this." Clumsily, he leaned forward, but she was far too fast for him as she moved out of the way. "Man, she really did a number on you." "Who?" he asked as the thread of conversation evaporated from in front of him. "Your model-perfect girlfriend," Melody said, and in the brief moment that he forgot about the keys, she grabbed them. "Come on, let's get you home before those beers start really taking effect." It was at least her 700th game of solitaire, that Eve was no longer counting them. He was out with Melody. That wasn't terribly bad. It was the 2 friends they were with that bothered her. Maybe Melody fixed him up again and he couldn't tell her no. But that didn't explain Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. She snapped another card out of the deck. She wanted to be mad, to be furious, to hate him forever and go on with her life. The only problem was, she couldn't do that. He now had a place inside her, a place she couldn't just deny no matter how much she wanted to. Then again, what more did she expect? She knew from the beginning that he wasn't exactly stable, jumping from job to job, and what was that whole LA thing anyway? Who just picks up and moves out there for no good reason? Another card snapped out of her hand and hit the table. Her finger tapped up and down on the table like a bored woodpecker as her mind searched for a place to play. He was jerking her around, that's what he was doing, playing with her, toying with her. Sure, she hadn't wanted more than a friend to begin with, but that was no longer the case. Humiliation ran over her when she thought about her actions in the mountains. He probably thought it was hilarious how she had practically thrown herself at him. Then there was Sunday. Ugh. She couldn't even think about that. How could she have let herself fall for someone so obviously not ready for commitment, so obviously immature as AJ Knight? He was a kid. He always would be, and she would be better off if she just found a way to put him out of her head and her heart for good. From the moment AJ opened his eyes to the sunshine the next morning, the world was set on permanent spin cycle. "Ugh," he moaned, draping an arm over his stinging eyes. With the other hand, he managed to take hold of the curtain and pull it across the window. However, his hand continued long past the stopping point, and when it landed, the lamp didn't quite move out of the way quickly enough. The resulting crash echoed through his head like a gong. Ugh! 2 tons of bricks couldn't have felt heavier as he rolled to one side and pulled himself up off the bed. When he looked down, he realized he was still in the same clothes from the night before, only now they smelled much worse than he remembered them. Flashes of pictures jumped through his mind in no real pattern as he swayed forward on the bed. The bar, he remembered that part, and dancing. Vaguely, he remembered that. And then there was something about melody that he couldn't quite catch on to. Pushing that and everything else away, he stood and made his way across the hall into the bathroom. His mouth felt like someone had stuffed it full of cotton. If it was possible, he looked even worse than he felt, he thought when he glanced into the mirror. He fought with his eyelids to keep them open, although he wasn't really sure why that was such a good idea. It would be so much better to simply let them have their way and go closed permanently. Knowing that he couldn't go downstairs in this shape, he turned on the shower, but before he could take even a stitch of clothes off, his hand found the wall as the spinning recommenced. Slowly, carefully, he slid down the wall and laid his head on his knees. Hollow tears slid from his burning eyes, and he couldn't get enough energy up to even care why. All he wanted to do was to sit right there and hurt forever. Chapter 20. The moment he drove up to the grocery store, AJ knew he was in trouble. First of all, according to the radio report, there was only one victim, a cardiac arrest with possible head trauma from the fall. However, one ambulance was already parked out front along with a fire truck, so either it was worse than the radio said, or he had just driven through noon traffic for nothing. "I've got the stuff," Lerone said, grabbing the bag and sliding from his seat. With the precision that comes with a lot of practice, AJ threw the vehicle in park and jumped out his door. He was racing up to the automatic doors just as the stretcher came out the exit on the other side. In the next heartbeat, Lerone followed it out. "They got it," Lerone said in annoyance. "That's it?" AJ asked. "What's up with the fire truck?" "They were here on a routine walkthrough inspection when the guy keeled over in produce." "Talk about good timing," AJ said, turning with Lerone for the ambulance just as 2 firefighters walked out of the store behind them. "Well, fancy meeting you here," Gabe said, clapping AJ on the back before AJ even knew he was there. "I should have guessed," AJ said, laughing. "I'd pass out too if I saw you walking by." "Such a funny line from such an unfunny person. What's going on? I hear you and Eve are burning up the town these days." Confusion flashed over AJ as they walked up to the fire truck. "Who told you that?" "Hey, AJ," Jeff said, sneaking up from behind him and goosing him in the ribs. "Long time no see. You hibernating at Eve's these days, or what?" You guys are going to put me out of a job showing up on calls like this," he said, totally clueless as to how to answer their other questions. "Not likely," Gabe said, swinging a leg up into the truck. "Captain Fearless here can't even count to 15. It's not my fault they kept coming on the loudspeaker. Ding, spill on aisle 7. Ding, price check on aisle 2, Jeff said. "Like I said," Gabe said to AJ as he jumped back to the asphalt, "don't quit your day job." AJ laughed, although something warned him not to let them draw him in. "Hey, we haven't had a chance to take your money in a long time," Gabe said. "What's up with that?" "Oh, I've been busy," AJ said, stumbling on the excuse. Jeff smiled knowingly as AJ's heart fell into his shoes. "Well, I'm not one not to notice a lovely lady when I see her," Gabe said. "And believe me, Eve's about as lovely as they come. But you can't hang out with her all the time. The rest of us might get jealous." "You're just saying that because you want my money." "No, well, okay, I am. But what do you say? Tomorrow night? Jeff's about 8:15 or so. There'll be snacks." He wanted to say no. He knew he should say no. But instead, he nodded. "As long as you let me win a few." "Let you win? That's hardly—" "AJ," Lerone called from the ambulance door. "We got another call." "Gotta go," AJ said with a wave. "See you guys tomorrow night." "See ya," Gabe called. "Take care of yourself out there," Jeff called, and AJ waved again just as he jumped into the ambulance. Work was the only thing keeping her sane. Over and over, Eve told herself how important it was to get started on the right foot in this new position. She didn't want the employees under her or the new manager over her to think she wasn't capable and committed to doing the job to the best of her ability. And so it was easy to rationalize the extra hours spent at the store. It wasn't hard to bury herself in the work and pretend like there was no rest of her life. In fact, she had done such a good job of it that when she got home with only a week to go in February, she never so much as questioned the blinking red light on her machine. She punched it and then walked into the kitchen where she slipped off her shoes. "Hey, Eve girl, long time no talk," Lisa said from the machine, and Eve's spirit crashed to the ground on the sound. "Give me a call. We need to catch up, and I want to hear everything. Oh, and poker night tomorrow night. Come on over. I promise I won't make you wallpaper." Lisa signed off, and Eve sat down at the table with a small bottle of water. Lisa wanted to hear everything. Everything. That explained why Lisa hadn't been beating down her door. She still thought everything was great with her and AJ. Better than great by the sound of that message. The ache in Eve's chest knifed through her throat. Telling Lisa would do one of two things. Either confirm Eve's worst fears that AJ wanted nothing to do with her, or make two of his good friends hate him forever. As angry as she was at him, she didn't want him to suffer just because he didn't want to go out with her. There were far worse offenses in life than that. And so she decided that making that call could wait, at least until Lisa called back and demanded answers. That moment would come eventually, but it wasn't here yet, and at the moment, that was all that Eve really cared about. 7:30 wasn't that early, but AJ knew he should have at least taken something other than the shortcut to get to Jeff's. As he stood on their front porch and rang the doorbell, the question of what he was doing here at all streaked through him. The fact that someone was bound to bring up the whole Eve subject was more than a distinct possibility, as was the fact that Lisa already knew the whole story and was waiting on the other side of that door to pounce. That thought turned him back down the steps just as the door came open. "Hey there," Lisa said, and AJ knew there was no escaping now. When he turned, the sight of her holding Alex and bouncing him softly tore through him. "Look, Alex, it's AJ. Remember him? He's the one that gave you your favorite hat." Then she stopped talking to the baby and looked at AJ with a smile that held no animosity. "It's good to see you again. Come on in." When he made the top step, Lisa reached over and put her free arm around his neck. He hugged her quickly and then stepped into the entryway as embarrassment heated its way into his ears. "I tried to clean up, but nothing stays clean anymore. Sorry," Lisa said, leading him to the living room. "But have a seat anywhere you can find one." Sheepishly, AJ folded himself onto the couch and shifted when the emptiness of the house invaded his consciousness. "What'd you do, shoot Jeff?" Lisa laughed. "No, he went out for snacks. Seems he had this silly idea that I was capable of going to the grocery store with 50 pounds of baby stuff to lug along. He'll be back in a few minutes." AJ nodded, fighting to think of something else to say. Something normal. Something... "I'm surprised Eve didn't come with you," Lisa said, before he came up with what that something was. He looked for words, but none came. "I guess you two've been tearing up the town since you got back." However, the affirmation of that statement that she had obviously expected wasn't forthcoming. "I mean, I haven't talked to her in like 3 weeks, so I figured." For all the screaming in his brain, the best his body could do was to sit there and rub his hands together as the sweat poured off of them. Her meandering sentence slipped into oblivion. "Is Eve all right?" Lisa finally asked. "Yeah," he said quickly. Then his gaze fell to his hands. "I mean, I guess so. I hope so." "You hope so? What do you guys have, a fight or something?" He couldn't face her. The guilt in the middle of him dragged his gaze to the carpet. "No, we didn't have a fight. Exactly." You didn't have a fight exactly. What does that mean? It's just, I don't know. He shrugged. I think Eve deserves somebody better than me. Somebody better? What? Despite the guilt, he glanced over at Lisa, and instantly tears stung his eyes. He shook his head as his gaze fell. She doesn't really know me. She thinks she does, but... Lisa shook her head slowly as if it was spinning. Okay, I'm lost. When you left New Mexico, you looked like you were about 2 steps from the altar, and now you're telling me that she could do better? How do you figure that? It's just... His hands were rubbing together at a fever pitch. She thinks I'm this invincible hero, that I can do anything, that I always know exactly what to do. But if she knew the real truth... He shook his head slowly. It's all such a lie. All of it. I'm not invincible. I'm not a saint. I'm not even much of a hero. I can't do the impossible, even when doing anything else means that somebody is going to die because I couldn't. AJ, nobody's asking you to do the impossible, Lisa said gently. We're just glad you do what you can. Slowly, he shook his head. You wouldn't say that if you were Eve. Why not? Because Dustin... The memories yanked the tears from his eyes. I was there the night Dustin died. I rode the ambulance with him. I was new at the time, and I didn't know what I was doing. I should have done something more to help him, something so he could have gone back home to her, so he'd be here for her now. He clamped his lips together to stop the tears. She doesn't know about that night. He glanced over at Lisa, but could hardly make out her face through the tears. I can't tell her now. I can't tell her that she lost her husband because I didn't know what I was doing. Slowly, Lisa stood from the chair and stepped over to where he was on the couch. He sniffed back the tears, fighting to get them to stop, but still they came like soldiers over the battle lines. Carefully, she sat next to him and laid a hand on his shoulder that was hunched forward. Believe me, AJ, Eve knows how hard it is out there. She knows you do your best on every call, and she'll know you did your best that night. She loved him so much, and I let her down. I let you all down. When Lisa spoke again, there were tears welling in her voice. You know what I remember from that night? He shook his head. I remember getting a call from a young guy who knew that Jeff needed somebody there with him because he was in pain, and he was scared, and he was sitting in that hospital all alone with no one to lean on. I really can't imagine how scary that was for him, knowing how bad Dustin was and how much pain he was in himself. But I remember walking in and being so grateful that you'd taken time out to call me. You certainly didn't have to. You could have just left him there like that, just gone on with your work and let the hospital sort it all out. But you didn't do that. You cared enough to go out of your way to help, and I know I'll forever be grateful for that. Lisa sat for a long moment, trying to collect herself. There are things we can do, and there are things only God can do. You did what you could. Don't beat yourself up because you couldn't do his job. All the hours he'd spent ripping into himself about what he could have done or should have done suddenly felt very heavy. But how can I tell her now? I mean, she trusts me, or at least she did until I stopped calling. I think she's just going to hate me now, no matter what I do. Softly, Lisa laughed. You underestimate her. Besides, Eve is smarter than that. She knows a good thing when she sees it. A good thing? Ha! I'm hardly a catch, AJ said, sniffing back the last of the tears. Besides, she's gorgeous, and I'm such an idiot. Strange, weird, bizarre, yes. An idiot? I don't think so. The crash of the door brought their attention to it as Jeff walked in, 2 sacks in each hand. Instantly, AJ jumped to his feet. You need some help? There's more in the car, Jeff said. I'll get it, AJ said, thankful for the interruption. As he walked out to the car, he berated himself. What had he just told Lisa? Lisa, of all people. Sure, she seemed understanding and not at all angry, but still, he must have completely lost his mind at some point in the past. That was the only explanation. The ringing of the phone pulled Eve out of the long, hot shower she was enjoying, and quickly she wrapped a towel around herself and grabbed it. She sat down on the bed. "Hello?" "Hey, Eve girl," Lisa said lightly, and Eve wished she had just let the machine get it. "Hey, Lise." She pushed the wet hair from her face. "What's up?" "Just checking up on my favorite nurse." "Oh, then you must have the wrong number." "No, I don't think so. So, how's life? We haven't seen you in a while." "I figured you'd be bleary-eyed trying to take care of 2 babies at one time," Eve said, just as in the background she heard the card-playing commotion, and her heart sank. She wanted to ask who was there, but it seemed a ridiculous question. More than that, if he was there, it would confirm that he was indeed just fine and going on with life without her. "That's what I was calling about," Lisa said. "I'm in desperate need of a shopping break. This house is driving me crazy." "Have you been back to work yet?" "I went in for a couple of hours this week, but mostly it's been the staff." "Ah, trusting. Scary, huh?" "So what, are we going to take Alex?" "Shopping? I'm not that brave yet. No, Jeff's off, and he's generously agreed to stay home." "And you're not worried he's going to have a keg party while we're gone?" Another cry of defeat in the background. "No, that's tonight," Lisa said with a laugh. "Come on, Eve, save me, please." "Well, if it's life and death, and we are talking shopping therapy, I bet I could pencil you in." "That's what I wanted to hear," Lisa said. All evening, AJ's heart listened for the doorbell as his gaze kept vigilant watch over the entryway. For some illogical reason, he had expected Lisa to invite Eve over. True, he didn't want to see her, or his mind kept saying that he didn't. Yet his heart simply wouldn't get in line. It wanted to see her. It did. And that's all there was to it. So it was with soul-bending confusion that he walked out of their house at 1 and drove home. The memories of her smile at 70 miles an hour drilled through him. If he could just find a way to tell her. But what words could he use now? They all seemed so empty, so meaningless in the face of this. Shaking his head at even considering the impossible, he drove past her turnoff and sighed. No, she was better off without him, and he would just have to find a way to live with that. All night, AJ was right there in Eve's dreams, standing on the cabin porch, holding her, skiing, that first night on the couch at Gabe's, over and over so that when she awoke the next morning, she was almost surprised that he wasn't actually beside her. It was absurd to let herself go down that path. He wanted nothing to do with her, and what choice did she have but to abide by that decision? With that unbelievably difficult understanding, she crawled out of bed and went to get ready for the shopping extravaganza with Lisa. "God, help me get through this in one piece," she prayed, as she reluctantly pulled a gold-orange tank top with matching sweater and a form-fitting off-white skirt out of the closet. "How are you with directions?" Jeff asked as AJ sat in his kitchen the next afternoon, having been summoned by his mother from the garage. "Driving directions?" AJ asked in confusion. "No, putting things together directions." "Oh," AJ shrugged. "Not bad. Why?" "Because I want to surprise Lisa with this baby bed, but between feeding Alex and killing my thumb with this stupid screw gun, the only thing that's going to surprise her is the mess." AJ laughed. "Trust me, I don't think she'll be too surprised by that." "Ha ha. Seriously, are you busy?" "Blowing my brains out with a stereo." "Well, come on over here. I've got some headphones you can use to blow your brains out while you work." "How is it I always get to work when I'm around you?" "You're just too talented." "I am, aren't I?" "Yeah, bring that big head and your talent and get over here already." "I'll be there." "I hate this," Lisa called from the other side of the dressing room door. "The dress?" Eve asked with concern. No, that I'm never going to fit in anything again. It's only been a month. That's my point. I hate this. With a snap, Lisa stomped out of the dressing room, leaving the dress in a heap. Let's go get some ice cream. Eve arched her eyebrows, but said nothing as she followed her friend out of the store. We could always go see a movie or something. No, right now I just want a big bowl of Rocky Road ice cream. With a shrug, Eve followed Lisa to one of the mall's food booths. Before she could protest, Lisa bought them both ice cream and handed her one. They found a little table and sat down. So, tell me about this new job, Lisa said. Insert piece 37 into the hollow end of A and snap together, Jeff read from his position on the floor where he was holding Alex in one hand and the directions in the other. Piece 37, AJ said, trying to hold the directions in his mind long enough to accomplish them. Into the hollow end of A and snap together. Carefully, AJ tried it one way, then took it apart and tried it another. You know, Alex, if you would just stay in that bassinet thing, we wouldn't be in this mess. Tell me about it, Jeff said as he bounced his son softly on the cradle of his bent leg. And you thought painting was bad. AJ mashed his face in concentration as he pushed the two pieces together, finally causing them to snap. Done? Jeff asked. Either done or broken. Let's hope it's not broken or we get to start over. Why didn't you get one that was at least semi-together? Saving money, Jeff said, peering at the next directions. At this rate, we're going to have to use what you saved on a mental hospital. Slide the side panel together with the foot panel at notches. I really should have my head examined for agreeing to this. Jeff smiled at AJ in victory. Too late. Slide the side panel. Eve had waited for the AJ bomb to hit all afternoon. Once, when Lisa had mentioned sending Dr. Brealey a thank you card, Eve had known it was coming. But it hadn't. She couldn't quite figure that out until just after 5, they pulled back into Lisa's driveway and parked conspicuously at the curb was the Civic. Jeff's never going to believe I only bought one dress, Lisa said, acting like she hadn't even noticed. He'll probably search the car for the rest of the loot. I could let you hold my shoes, then he'll think you got more than you did, Eve offered, even as her alert mechanisms screamed at her not to go into that house. Lisa stood from the car and gathered her things. There's an idea. Without question, she started up the walk as Eve's feet padded slower and slower behind her. She wanted to think of an excuse, but the only phrase that was complete in her head was, "He's here." On Lisa's yank, Eve caught the door and stepped slowly into the house, wondering where he was and willing herself not to do anything stupid when she saw him. And the mattress goes in, AJ said, swinging the cushion over the now completed frame. Done. Cool, Jeff said, nodding in satisfaction just as Lisa strode by the door. A heartbeat, and she stepped back into the doorway. Am I seeing what I think I'm seeing? She asked in awe. She stepped over to the now fully assembled crib. Oh, it's perfect. It's so perfect. Just a second, I'll get the bedding. Alex is sleeping, Jeff half called as she raced from the room, and she waved to indicate she had heard. Very nice work, Jeff said, holding his hand out to AJ, but the gesture vanished into the vision that was suddenly standing in the doorway. He had told himself that she was nothing more than a dream, that he could live without her, that she couldn't have been as incredible as he had thought she was. But with one glance at the slender frame and those solemn, uncertain eyes, all those lies disappeared. Slowly, Jeff turned to where AJ's gaze was nailed, and he smiled and stepped over to her to give her a quick hug. Hey, Eve, have you been out spending all our money? She looked down at the white bag in her hand and held it up. Shoes. Figures, Jeff said jovially, even as he kept his arm around her. Here we are, Lisa said, pushing by the two of them with a giant plastic bag of baby bed items. Without pretense, she unzipped it and dumped it on the floor. She picked up one long padded piece of cloth and threw it to the side. Man, where do you start with this stuff? "Don't look at me," AJ said in mock fear. "I put the bed together." "I thought you were going to put it together," Lisa said, looking at Jeff teasingly. "He helped," Jeff said, directing a warning look at AJ. "Well, I'm glad somebody did," Lisa said as she sorted out the rest of the bag. "You need all the help you can get." "She's got a point," AJ said, knowing his only salvation was in interacting with Jeff and Lisa and not focusing on the heart-stopping beauty across the room. "Hey!" Jeff picked up a pillow and threw it squarely at AJ's chest. "What? She does." "Here, Eve, help me with this," Lisa said, and AJ noticed how reluctantly she moved from the door. When she took the sheet from Lisa, AJ took a step backward away from the crib. He watched as she leaned over the railing to pull the mattress out. However, it was heavier than she had anticipated. "Here," AJ said, instantly jumping to help her. Her gaze grazed him when he bent to help her, and the sad helplessness in it knocked him backward. Carefully, he pulled the mattress out as she put the sheet onto it. However, the sheet was barely big enough, and it slipped off a corner she had already finished. He reached for it, just as she did, and in a flash, they both jumped back from the touch. For one unbelievable second, her gaze locked with his, and then she buried her gaze in the remainder of the task. "Done," he said, dropping the mattress into the bed. He hadn't wanted to hurt her, but he had. That much was too utterly clear for words. Lisa handed him another piece of the bedding. "That goes by the bars." Trying not to get tangled in Eve's sights again, he worked quickly to attach first one piece and then another until the bedding was in place. Just before he proclaimed the project finished, a small cry sounded from down the hallway. Jeff started out, but Lisa was too quick and slipped past him. In the next second, they were gone. "What about this?" Eve asked, and he heard the anger. She lifted a bumper pad. "It goes on the headboard," AJ said. He reached out for it. "Here." "I can do it," she said, yanking it away. In rapid motion, she attached the pad and stepped back. "See, Alex," Lisa said as she walked back in. "This is your new bed. Isn't it great?" AJ wanted to be proud of the accomplishment, but it was clear that at least one other person in the room was less than impressed. Reluctantly, he put his hands in his back pockets and tried to fade into the sponge paint on the wall. "How does steak sound for supper?" Jeff asked, slapping his hands together. "Oh, I've got," AJ started. "I'm supposed to," Eve started. "No, now I'm not taking no for an answer," Jeff said firmly. "We owe you guys. Besides, I'm cooking." "And that's a good thing?" AJ asked, fighting to find any sense of joking in his heart. "It's a very good thing. Trust me," Lisa said. "Okay, I'm in," AJ said, not daring to speak for Eve. "Eve?" Jeff asked. She shrugged. It was the best they were going to get. This has been White Knight, Book 2, The Courage series, written by Staci Stallings, narrated by Becky Dowdy. Copyright 2012 by Staci Stallings. Production copyright 2014 by Staci Stallings.
You don't want to miss what comes next. Like and subscribe to the Staci Stallings YouTube channel so you never miss a second of the story.